Chapter 1289. Amidst the toast. Unknowingly, Qinyi had already fallen into Lin Yu's arms. At this time, Sui Shui and Goddess Yuqing sat at the side with drunken faces. They listened to the conversation between Lin Yu, the dark priest, and the great sun boundless Buddha. The great sun boundless Buddha also sighed at this time and said, "I remember that in the past, you were just a little kid who had just set foot on the path of cultivation. Time has passed, and now you are already a supreme powerhouse who can suppress the universe. In front of you, I have always been an immature youth," Lin Yu said with a smile. At the same time, he was also somewhat emotional in his heart. Although many things had happened since he got rid of the cycle of reincarnation, everything was still vaguely in front of him. In the blink of an eye, it was already night. The bright moon hung high in the sky. The entire Divine King Palace was still brightly lit. Qinyi had been in Lin Yu's arms. At this time, her brows were deeply furrowed and she couldn't help but tighten her grip on Lin Yu a little. Several people were still drinking. What was rare was that the great sun-boundless Buddha also raised his wine cup. This was a rare leisure time for everyone. During this period of time, Lin Yu also accompanied these old friends. Because she didn't know when they would meet again. She didn't know when it would be. These wines were originally of no use to Lin Yu and the others. But now they were all drunk. After the Archaeosaurus came in, he directly hugged the wine jar and was already drunk. Now, he fell asleep on Sky Phoenix's shoulder. Sky Phoenix also didn't dislike the Archaeosaurus and let him lean on her shoulder. In the blink of an eye, it was already the morning of the second day. Everyone returned to their respective residences. Lin Yu was the only one standing on the steps of the Deity King Palace, looking at the vast sun as it slowly rose. There was calmness in his eyes, and no one knew what he was thinking. He put his hands behind his back. A breeze blew, and a strand of his black hair fluttered. Lin Xiu and Lin Yuan also came behind Lin Yu at this time. The three of them didn't speak. They looked at the sun in the distance together. Until the sun rose and the sunlight shone on the earth. Dewdrops fell from the ancient tree. Lin Yu turned around and said to Lin Xiu and Lin Yuan, "I am going to the other side of the realm sea." Lin Yu knew very well that the resources of the 12 universes were no longer enough to support his rapid advancement. Right now, the strange race had already begun to invade the universe. They didn't know what was going on ahead. Lin Yu needed to go alone to investigate the situation. At the same time, he could follow the path of his first ancestor and search for a way to break through. "Divine King, don't worry and go. We two brothers will be here." Lin Xiu said something that was rare for him. He was not good with words, but he only revealed his true feelings. "Big brother, you can rest assured," Lin Yuan also said at this time. They all knew that Lin Yu was now standing at the top of the 12 universes. There was no longer any creation in the universe that could support his advancement. Perhaps at the limits of the realm sea, that legendary land of origin, there was a mysterious substance. Now, there was not much time left for Lin Yu. Under Lin Yu's deduction using the ancient characters, he could already vaguely sense that the Black Calamity was coming. At that time, the 12 universes would not be able to escape the calamity. He thought of the Taoist guide in the first universe. His realm must have been at the Tao induction realm back then. But in the end, only a wisp of true spirit was left, guarding the shore of the realm sea. As a lamp, it guided the way back for the people who were moving forward. One could imagine how terrifying it was. Therefore, Lin Yu did not want to bring anyone with him now. He wanted to follow in the footsteps of the ancestors and go to the land of origin. Even if he was really lost, he would think of a way to suppress the coming darkness. But before leaving, Lin Yu still had one more thing to do, and that was to search all the remaining fragments of the pottery jar in all the universes. This was an extremely time-consuming thing. Lin Yu could use this time to accompany these old friends. Maybe Bai Xiaoli knows the location of some fragments, Lin Xiu said. This was also considered by Lin Yu. He looked at Lin Yuan. The 10 great monster kings were once the supreme living beings in the world. The essence blood in their bodies must be terrifying. Lin Yuan might be able to obtain an unimaginable fortune from it. And it just so happened that Lin Yu now had pottery jars and other artifacts that could shock even the supreme beings. Perhaps he could try to fulfill his promise and completely free the 10 great fiend kings. Until noon of the second day, everyone woke up. Lin Yu also told them that he was going to the 10 Square World to discuss some things with Bai Xiaoli. He brought Lin Yuan and Lin Xiu and set off immediately. With the help of Not Heaven, the 3 of them quickly arrived at the 10 Square World. Bai Xiaoli was now completely awake, but her strength was still recovering. The few of them arrived at the Sky Island. Lin Yu had the token of the 10 Square World, so it was easy for him to enter. Ching Feng and Bai Yu came out to welcome him. Seeing that Lin Yu's aura was getting more and more unfathomable, Bai Yu's eyes were filled with shock and sadness. Now, Bai Yu had truly broken through to the God King realm, but the gap between her and Lin Yu was getting bigger. After sensing Lin Yu's aura, Bai Xiaoli quickly appeared in the main hall. 9 fox tails casually drooped on the throne with a sense of laziness. "I would like to ask you about something." Lin Yu and the other 2 found a seat and sat down. Lin Yu didn't bother to be polite with Bai Xiaoli and asked directly. "You want to ask about the pottery jar fragments?" Bai Xiaoli asked. Seeing Lin Yu nod his head, Bai Xiaoli sighed and said, "I only know a little about the pottery jar fragments of the 12 universes. As for the other universes, you might have to ask the old masters of the other sacred grounds." Hearing Bai Xiaoli's words, this was somewhat in line with Lin Yu's thoughts. Now that he had come to the 10 Square World, he had the same intention. However, Lin Yu knew how powerful the seal of the 10 great monster kings was, so he needed to be fully prepared. Now, it was urgent to rescue the 10 great monster kings. From Lin Yu's understanding of the ancient history, there were only a few words. He knew that the 10 great monster kings were once the main force against the strange, but for unknown reasons, they were sealed in the sacred grounds. Unsealing the seals of the 10 demon kings is no small matter. Have you made all the necessary preparations? Bai Xiaoli's eyes shone with a glint. Now that he had cultivated for a long time, coupled with the aura of the pottery jar. The aura emitted from his body was getting more and more terrifying. Almost in the blink of an eye, one could see the destruction of the universe and stars. Bai Yu and the others were at the side, faintly unable to withstand the pressure. Their bodies couldn't help but tremble. There should be no problem. Lin Yu took out the stone sword that he had obtained from Gutsong. It was now emitting a supreme aura. In Gutsong's hands, because his body had been corroded by the strange, it was difficult for him to unleash the full power of the sword. Now that the stone sword was no longer suppressed by the strange substance, it was gradually recovering. "I want to refine the stone sword into my Emperor sword, and let it evolve into a supreme weapon," Lin Yu said slowly. He didn't have the strength to do so now. He needed to borrow Bai Xiaoli's power. "The stone sword's true spirit has been destroyed, but can your Emperor sword bear this power?" Bai Xiaoli frowned. If he did so, Lin Yu would have an additional supreme weapon in his hands. A supreme weapon, also known as a primordial artifact, could bear the great Tao. Now, Lin Yu's Emperor sword was just a divine artifact after being nurtured by the pottery jar. After being nurtured by the pottery jar, there should be no problem, Lin Yu said. He had thought about this problem a long time ago. His Emperor sword was gradually unable to bear his power, and he had to find a way to evolve it. From what I know, other than your God King's token, no one has ever refined a primordial artifact before. It can only be produced naturally. Every artifact condenses the principles of heaven and earth, and this stone sword is no exception. If you want to refine it into your Emperor sword, it might be very difficult. Bai Xiaoli said slowly. Primordial artifact wasn't something that could be forged after birth. It was nurtured by heaven and earth. There weren't many of them in the world. And this stone sword was obviously one of them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be held by a supreme. Chapter 1290. There's one more thing. Even though utmost beings can craft out unparalleled utmost weapons, compared to primordial god weapons, there's still a grade lower. They can't be compared at all. Bai Xiaoli explained for Lin Yu. The primordial god weapon in his hands was something that was formed by the intertwining of the heavens and earth at the birth of the world. Are you asking me to give up on the Emperor's sword and refine the primordial god weapon instead? Lin Yu asked. However, he already had an answer in his heart. He couldn't give up on his Emperor's sword. After fighting with it for so long, he had already developed feelings for it. Furthermore, the Emperor's sword had already given birth to a simple consciousness. Lin Yu couldn't give it up. Naturally born primordial god weapons cannot be refined. Eventually, Bai Xiaoli concluded. However, there's another possibility. Right now, this primordial god weapon is already half destroyed, and its true spirit is no longer around. You can infuse the weapon spirit of the Emperor's sword into it. However, the chances of failure are extremely high. Bai Xiaoli continued. Lin Yu's Emperor's sword appeared in his hands. He looked at the two swords in his hands. At this moment, the Emperor's sword hummed softly, as though it could sense Lin Yu's thoughts. At this moment, it actually took the initiative to ask Lin Yu to infuse his weapon spirit into the stone sword. If you fail, the consciousness that was painstakingly born will cease to exist. Bai Xiaoli said slowly. This wasn't a game. Lin Yu was absolutely cold and heartless towards the outside world. However, ever since the Emperor's sword had followed him, it had been fighting alongside him. Lin Yu would not allow the weapon spirit of his Emperor's sword to disappear just like that. At this moment, the Emperor's sword vibrated once more. Lin Yu knew what it meant. Since you've already made up your mind. Lin Yu looked at the Emperor's sword in his hands and said slowly. However, the grade of the Emperor's sword was still too low. Bai Xiaoli had an idea. She suggested to Lin Yu, the old fella from the ancient Pot Holy Grounds is good at crafting weapons. You can look for him to find a way to upgrade the Emperor's sword. Lin Yu nodded his head. There was an idea now. Lin Yu didn't hesitate. He would take the Emperor's sword and head to the ancient Pot Holy Grounds now. I have another request. Lin Yu looked at Lin Yuan and continued. Can you please give my brother, Lin Yuan, a drop of blood essence? It was rare for Lin Yu to make a request. Lin Yuan was shocked, and his heart was very moved. Bai Xiaoli hesitated slightly. Lin Yu also knew what a drop of Demon King's blood meant. This was a drop of blood from the past. It was is it? If Lin Yu? Because Lin Yuan was in seclusion back then. He didn't get much good fortune and his current cultivation was far behind Lin Xiu and Lin Yu. I am about to leave and head to the land of origin. I hope that Lin Yuan's strength can go up as well. This way, even if I leave, they will have enough strength to protect the 12 universes. They don't have to worry about the invasion of others. Lin Yu said truthfully at this time. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Bai Xiaoli said indifferently. She had been with Lin Yu for a very long time. But she didn't continue. They all understood. I can give him a strand of blood essence. Bai Xiaoli finally said. But I have to say, the power contained in the blood essence of a demon king is terrifying beyond your imagination. I don't know if your brother can resist it. Bai Xiaoli said without hiding anything. The demon king was born at the beginning of the world. A demon king at his peak could annihilate an extremely powerful being with just a thought. Lin Yu looked at Lin Yuan. Second brother can refine strange creatures. Why can't I fuse with the blood essence of a demon king? Lin Yuan stood up with his burly figure. His eyes were filled with confidence. What I'm about to experience is far inferior to Big Brother and Second Brother, Lin Yuan said. He knew that Lin Yu had already died once when he broke through to the original God realm. Lin Xiu had fused with strange creatures and almost fell into darkness completely. It took him 1,000 years to wake up. It's good to have confidence. Bai Xiaoli didn't continue. In that case, you can go and find the ancient pot demon king, Bai Xiaoli said. With that, she brought Lin Yuan into the secret place. She was ready to pass a drop of blood essence to Lin Yuan. Lin Yu was born in an egg, and had a part of the demon race's bloodline. His physique was very mysterious. Even in ancient history, there were no records of him being able to fuse with the blood essence of a demon beast and use it for himself. This was also the reason why Lin Yu brought Lin Yuan to the 10-square world. It was to get a strand of the Demon King's blood essence for him. If Lin Yuan successfully fused with the Demon King's blood essence, his future achievements would be absolutely unimaginable. He would be able to directly open the threshold to the Supreme Realm. Lin Xiu was waiting here. Lin Yu used Bai Xiaoli's token and stepped through the realm gate. Not long after, he arrived at the ancient pot sacred ground. "You're here," a faint voice came. It was really the Demon King of the ancient pot sacred ground. Lin Yu came in front of the altar. He didn't hide anything and said, "Soon I will try to break your seal." "Not bad. But after such a long time, you have already broken through to the original God realm," the Demon King of the ancient pot sacred ground said slowly. His voice was intermittent and seemed to be very weak. After such a long time, his strength was constantly being consumed by the altar and was now close to extinction. "Something's wrong." At this moment, the Demon King of the ancient pot sacred ground sensed the aura on Lin Yu's body. "It's the aura of that artifact, and you have condensed the 9th level of the inner world." "No, above the 9th level, it's the taboo of the taboo." There were only a few things that could shock the Demon King in ancient history. At this moment, he was actually looking at an original God realm living being in such a state. "Ha ha! It seems like there is hope for me to break the seal." The reason why he gave Lin Yu the Demon King's mark was just to test it out. But not long after, when he saw Lin Yu, he changed his mind. The kid in front of him, whom he didn't think highly of, seemed to have some kind of unexpected power. Lin Yu said calmly, "To break your seal, I need to have full confidence." "What kind of confidence?" The Demon King of the ancient pot was in a good mood and asked directly. "I need you to refine my Emperor sword." Lin Yu took out the Emperor sword. The stone sword was stabbed into the ground. Primordial artifact, Heaven's Inquisition. The Demon King of the ancient pot didn't expect Lin Yu to take out this artifact. "You want to merge your Emperor Sword's artifact spirit into the primordial artifact?" The Demon King of the ancient pot's tone was obviously serious. "Yes," Lin Yu replied. "The chance of success is less than 1 in 100 million. The Demon King of the ancient pot was good at refining artifacts. He said directly, "Even if I refine your Emperor's sword into a divine artifact, the chance is slim." This wasn't a blow to Lin Yu. "I think we can try," Lin Yu said. "If I repair Heaven's Inquisition, the chance of breaking the seal will be much higher." Lin Yu threw out a condition that the Demon King of the ancient pot couldn't refuse. After a short silence, "All right, I will use my last bit of strength to help you." The Demon King of the ancient pot agreed. "But you have to swear that regardless of whether the refinement is successful or not, you have to use the Deity King's token and that artifact in your hands to help me break free." The Demon King of the ancient pot was too weak. He was on the verge of fading away and didn't have much strength left. "No problem." Lin Yu pointed 3 times to the sky and swore the heavenly Tao oath. Chapter 1291. When the ancient pot Holy Ground's Demon King saw Lin Yu make the oath of the heavens, he said slowly, "Place your Emperor sword on the altar." The Emperor sword in Lin Yu's hand floated away. It came to the altar. There was an endless amount of gray light. Gradually, it enveloped the entire place. The gray light turned into a huge fire. It began to refine the Emperor's sword. Time passed. The power of the ancient pot demon king was constantly being emitted from the altar. However, the ancient pot holy ground demon king was too weak now. Even though he had mastered an extremely powerful refining technique, he still needed Lin Yu to assist him. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. The body of the Emperor's sword gradually revealed a sharp aura. It seemed to be able to tear the sky apart. As Lin Yu's power continued to pour in, the Emperor's sword was constantly evolving. Kid, integrate a strand of your divine consciousness into it. At this moment, the ancient pot demon king said weakly. Lin Yu nodded. He manipulated his divine consciousness and entered the Emperor's sword. The Emperor's sword had already condensed a space. Lin Yu stood on the surface of the water. There was an unhatched egg in the middle. The sword chi was everywhere. It formed a huge sword chi storm outside. Lin Yu stood in front. He slid his wrist. There was pure divine consciousness power inside. The divine consciousness power turned into wisps of chi and entered the egg. The sword embryo inside was slowly recovering. Master, half a month passed. The Emperor's sword's weapon spirit began to recover. It turned into a young man with red lips and white teeth. However, there was a sword intent in his eyes. He had the aura of looking down on the world. All right, this is the limit of the Emperor's sword in your hand, the ancient pot demon king said slowly. Then, he fell into a deep sleep. The sword spirit of the Emperor's sword appeared in the outside world. He followed behind Lin Yu. Have you thought it through? Lin Yu asked without turning his head. I hope to be by your side for the rest of my life and fight against your enemies, the sword spirit said. His eyes were filled with determination. In his heart, if he couldn't shine in Lin Yu's hands, he would rather be destroyed. Lin Yu took out the stone sword. The simple stone sword did not emit any aura at all. However, if one were to sense it carefully, they would know how terrifying it was. Even Lin Yu's divine will couldn't penetrate it. This also meant that Lin Yu couldn't help the sword spirit of the Emperor's sword enter it. Everything depended on the Emperor's sword. However, Lin Yu still took out the clay jar in the end and suppressed the stone sword's aura to the lowest. The sword spirit of the Emperor's sword stood at the side. Boom, the Emperor's sword shattered. Broken into pieces, the sword spirit of the Emperor's sword charged into the stone sword with unparalleled sword essence. Everything became unknown. Lin Yu stood guard in front of the jar. The stone sword was suspended above the clay pot. The two auras were restraining each other. Just like that, 2 years passed. He could only sense that the sword spirit of the Emperor's sword's aura was getting weaker and weaker. In the end, it had almost completely disappeared. Almost failed. Lin Yu couldn't help but frown. The stone sword returned to silence. A primordial artifact was too terrifying. The ancient pot demon king had personally said that the chance of success was less than 1 in 100 million. Even if the Emperor's sword had successfully evolved. However, in history, no one had done so before. This was equivalent to refining a sciention item. Even the utmost beings couldn't refine a true primordial artifact back then. Even if they could reawaken the sword spirit, they couldn't do it. Not to mention injecting a new sword spirit into it. At this moment, the stone sword had completely dimmed. He returned to his normal state, looking ordinary and unremarkable. Even if it was thrown on the side of the road, no one would take a second look. Lin Yu sighed. When he stood up, he held the stone sword in his hand. When he was about to leave, the broken pieces of the Emperor's sword suddenly rushed up and slowly melted in the void. Finally, they gathered at the gap of the stone sword. However, it was still hard to sense the sword spirit's aura. Did you succeed? Lin Yu looked at the stone sword that was repaired by the Emperor's sword's pieces. He raised the sword, and with a swing, the sky was torn apart. The stone sword released some of the power of a primordial artifact. However, Lin Yu knew that this wasn't the full power of the stone sword. He was looking forward to the day when the stone sword would truly display the power of a primordial artifact. The sword spirit had succeeded, but it couldn't reveal its own consciousness. It seemed that the stone sword was too strong, and the sword spirit was imprisoned within. However, with his refinement, the sword spirit would awaken one day. Lin Yu looked at the altar and said slowly, "I'll make a trip to the 10-direction world. After gathering Bai Xiaoli, I'll try to save you." With that, Lin Yu left the ancient pot's sacred ground. Breaking the Demon King's seal was no small matter. Lin Yu had to be fully prepared. Now, he already had 2 supreme artifacts in his hands, plus the clay jar. Breaking the seal shouldn't be a big problem anymore. In the 10-direction world, Lin Yuan was now in the secret place. One could see that there was a terrifying demonic power emanating from the secret place. It even affected the entire 10-direction world. All of the living beings here had to endure a tremendous amount of pressure. Occasionally, the roar of a beast could be heard. Bai Xiaoli was already in the main hall. From time to time, Lin Yuan's painful roar could be heard. He was enduring great pain, which seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. The Demon King's blood essence was more terrifying than imagined. Lin Yuan's body exploded many times. However, they were all saved by Bai Xiaoli. Now, he was in the critical stage of refining. He needed to cross it himself, so Bai Xiaoli didn't care anymore. She just sealed the secret place to prevent Lin Yuan from going crazy and entering the 10-direction world, causing irreparable damage. Lin Yu just came outside the secret place and saw Lin Yuan's current state. After returning to the main hall, "I think we can try to rescue the other demon kings," Lin Yu said to Bai Xiaoli. "Did you succeed?" Bai Xiaoli asked with some concern. The stone sword appeared in his hand. Although it still looked ordinary, but with Bai Xiaoli's vision, she could naturally see that the stone sword was now exuding a different aura. Although it didn't have the power of a primordial artifact now, but it was gradually being repaired. Lin Yu nodded. Bai Xiaoli sighed, looked at the void and said, "The continuation of that disaster is coming, and it's time to rescue those old guys." Although he didn't get along with the Demon Kings, he had to take the overall situation into consideration. The Demon Kings were known to be the strongest combat power in the current world. The supreme beings who fought side by side with them in the past had all passed away. Now, only the 10 Demon Kings could fight against the end of the Black Calamity by themselves. This was also Lin Yu's consideration. Now, even if the Demon Kings were rescued, they would still need to spend a lot of time to recover their strength. The Black Calamity was coming and couldn't be delayed. "I'll go with you," Bai Xiaoli said. His current strength had already reached the Tao induction realm. He was the most powerful existence in the entire universe and the Holy Land. Moreover, he knew the seal the best. With Bai Xiaoli, the success rate would be much higher. After a short preparation for 2 days, Bai Xiaoli, Lin Yu, and Lin Xiu arrived at the ancient Pot Holy Land. "Old thing, it's time to wake up." Bai Xiaoli stood in front of the altar and said with an impatient tone, "I didn't expect you to be the first to come out." Ancient Pot Demon King replied weakly. Chapter 1292. Shouldn't I? Bai Xiaoli said indifferently. Bai Xiaoli's divine sense was the strongest among the 10 great demon kings. Back then, he had paid a huge price to free his divine sense from the altar. Only then did he have the chance to plan step by step in the following years. "That's true." Ancient Pot Demon King recalled the past. "Bring out those artifacts. I still have a few strands of power left." Ancient Pot Demon King's tone was obviously excited. He had been waiting for this day for too long. Ancient history had changed. He didn't know how long it had been since he last saw the outside world. "I wonder if the outside world still remembers me after so long, Ancient Pot Demon King." His voice was dull and weak. At this moment, Bai Xiaoli was already floating in the void. He looked at the altar below. Lin Yu took out the 3 artifacts. Lin Xiu held the stone sword. Bai Xiaoli held the clay jar. And the Divine King's token was in Lin Yu's hands. When these 3 artifacts appeared at the same time, the weather changed and lightning constantly descended. The scene around the altar became extremely terrifying. It was as if the world was about to be destroyed. It was terrifying. The 3 of them stood in the lightning and were not affected at all. Lin Yu's body began to emit the power of time and space. When he saw Lin Yu break through to the original God realm, he revealed his strength for the first time. Bai Xiaoli couldn't help but be shocked. Although he had already sensed that Lin Yu had condensed the 9th level of his inner world. Lin Yu had also asked him. The 9th level of his inner world was already the limit. But when he saw Lin Yu holding the Divine King's token and bombarding the altar, the look in Bai Xiaoli's eyes changed drastically. It's not the 9th level? At this moment, 12 worlds appeared behind Lin Yu. It was truly an endless supply of power. The sky was shaking. The taboo of taboo, Bai Xiaoli couldn't help but comment in the end. But he was only slightly surprised. The clay jar began to emit an ancient light that shone on the altar. The magnificent altar began to shake. It seemed to have also sensed the power of the clay pot. Bai Xiaoli and the others had never mentioned the origin of the pottery jar, but after holding it for so long, Lin Yu could vaguely guess. It was very likely that the grade of the jar had already surpassed that of a supreme artifact. Even the stone sword couldn't compare to it. There should be a hidden history behind it. As a result, Bai Xiaoli and the others were extremely wary of mentioning the pottery jar. Sword light surged. Lin Xiu also began to use the stone sword's supreme power. The 3 forces bombarded the altar at the same time. Boom! It was as if he was opening up the world. The spacetime Tao laws began to fall into disarray. An astonishing anomaly appeared here. However, these 3 powers were far from enough to break the seal on the altar. Lin Yu and the other 2 also realized this point. The ancient character appeared in the void. I didn't expect you to have mastered the origin ancient characters as well. Ancient Pot Demon King was also exerting his strength. At this moment, he could sense the power Lin Yu was using. He couldn't help but be deeply surprised. It had only been 10,000 years, but Lin Yu had given him too many surprises. Lightning tribulation continued to descend from the sky. It seemed to be preventing Ancient Pot Demon King from escaping. The pressure of the heavenly Tao also appeared. It began to stop Lin Yu and the others from taking any further action. Who was it that sealed the Demon King back then? Lin Yu's heart was already filled with doubts. When he saved Bai Xiaoli back then, his realm wasn't high and the seal was already very weak, so he didn't feel this way. But now, the power of the heavenly Tao was gradually manifesting. That meant that the person who sealed the Demon King back then was definitely powerful. At this moment, just because of the seal he left behind, he could actually trigger the power of the heavenly Tao. Blood flowed from the corner of Lin Xiu's mouth. He was the most severely suppressed at this moment, because he had used a strange power to break through to the original God realm and was not allowed by the heavenly Tao. Under the manifestation of the heavenly Tao, Lin Xiu was about to be buried. The hidden dangers in Lin Xiu's body were not completely removed. At this moment, under the suppression of the heavenly Tao, cracks appeared all over his body. Even his sword-wielding arm was slowly dissipating. Lin Xiu, retreat. Lin Yu noticed Lin Xiu's condition. Lin Xiu did not act rashly. The stone sword appeared in Lin Yu's hand. He activated 2 supreme weapons at the same time. However, the power in his body was supported by the 12 worlds and was still endless. However, the burden on his body was also very huge. Although Lin Yu appeared very calm, it was very strenuous, especially under the suppression of the heavenly Tao. Lin Yu's condition was also very bad. Not long after, blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, He was not like Lin Xiu, who did not have the Tao fruit allowed by the heavenly Tao and wanted to completely destroy it. At this moment, ancient Pot Demon King was under the altar. He had already begun to grit his teeth and roared, "That guy, even though he has passed away, the methods he left behind are still so powerful." Now, he was in possession of 3 supreme artifacts, coupled with the power of the ancient word. The seal on the altar still showed no signs of breaking. Lin Yu, who was forcefully activating 2 supreme weapons, was gradually unable to hold on. Even the 12 inner worlds were beginning to dim at this moment, just as they were in a deadlock. "Both of you, please use your full strength again," Ancient Pot Demon King roared below. He was already prepared to stake it all and use all his trump cards. After being sealed for so long, these demon kings were also accumulating strength and trying to break the seal. However, the things that Lin Yu brought now were things that could not be gathered even in ancient history. Now was the perfect opportunity, and he did not want to miss it. "At most, I will just reveal my slumber again. Let's go all out," Ancient Pot Demon King said. Gradually, the bottom of the altar began to shake. It was as if heaven and earth were about to be torn apart. The entire ancient pot sacred ground felt like it was about to collapse. Starting from the altar, the ground began to crack, forming countless large canyons. Large rocks rumbled and rolled down. After a long time, there was a sound. Lin Xiu sat cross-legged at the side. His arm gradually recovered. Lin Yu held the 2 artifacts. His clothes fluttered and his black hair danced wildly. In his black eyes, a bright light burst forth. His 12 inner worlds once again unleashed terrifying power. The sound of chanting scriptures rang out. The power of his inner world in the upper 3 levels was revealed. The chanting of scriptures actually resisted the heavenly Tao. Lin Yu's aura was no longer suppressed. Under the full force explosion, the ground was further destroyed and exploded. The endless ground turned into dust and dissipated. Under a few terrifying forces, the land within a radius of 10,000 miles turned into nothingness. The scene here was no longer visible. One could only see a few terrifying auras that became extremely dense. It enveloped this place. Bai Xiaoli also used all her strength. At this moment, he had already recovered to the Tao induction realm. Holding the clay pot, he seemed to be an immortal king among the demon kings. He vaguely emitted a supreme aura. Above his 9 fox tails, the divine kingdom appeared and the power within was added to his body. Several forces acted on the altar at the same time. At this moment, an ancient seal appeared on the altar. The rainbow light was blazing, interweaving with Tao and truth. There was an immortal power flowing out. The current ancient Pot Demon King began to be destroyed from the inside. Gradually, the seal began to loosen. The world changed color at this moment. Strange red lightning began to descend. It enveloped the entire ancient pot sacred ground. The ancient Pot Demon King had been preparing for countless years. The power he had truly accumulated was unimaginable. This was a supreme power that had completely erupted at this moment. Lin Yu and Bai Xiaoli assisted from the outside. The seal began to shatter and the supreme power on it dissipated. This gave the ancient Pot Demon King hope. Finally, under the bombardment of the clay pot and stone sword, the seal shattered. But this was only the beginning. There was still a long way to go before the seal was truly broken. Chapter 1293. Lin Yu no longer held back and used the space-time superposition power of the King of God's decree. The 100-fold superposition power caused Lin Yu's figure to gradually become illusory. At this moment, he seemed to have transcended history. After entering the original God realm and mastering the space-time Tao law, Lin Yu used the King of God's decree, and the power he displayed became more and more terrifying. The stone sword in his hand dimmed, and its power was extremely restrained. He did not know the specific method to break the seal, so he could only break it with force. The world trembled. He swung the sword and the power surged. The altar began to shake and cracks slowly appeared. Even the seal was crumbling at this moment. Lin Yu's figure slowly condensed under the power of the King of God's decree and returned to its peak. He stood in front of the altar calmly. The aura of the ancient pot demon king began to appear from the broken altar. In the void, a magnificent figure that was comparable to the universe was reflected. A vine appeared with the sun, moon, and stars hanging on it. It was extremely mysterious. At the top, there was a gourd that could swallow the great Tao. The figure of the ancient pot demon king appeared. This was just the reflection of his aura, and it was already so terrifying. If he really reached his peak, it would be unimaginable. Ha ha ha! His voice pierced through the clouds. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. A gourd appeared in the broken ancient pot's sacred ground. It pressed on the altar and crushed the altar that had sealed him for countless years. A cloud of white gas was spat out from the gourd and condensed into a blurry figure. This was the real body of the ancient pot demon king. However, his aura was very weak now. He had not even reached the ancestor realm and needed a long time to recuperate. Bai Xiaoli came to the surface. She returned the jar to Lin Yu. Old man, are you happy? You're finally free. Bai Xiaoli's aura was a little chaotic. Obviously, she had consumed a lot of energy to help the ancient pot demon king. Thank you, old fox. The ancient pot demon king was in a good mood. Tch. Bai Xiaoli turned her head and said, Since you're free, I'll go back first. Bai Xiaoli said goodbye. In the past, the 10-direction world and the ancient pot sacred ground did not have a good relationship. Many conflicts broke out in the heaven burial ground. Ancient Vase Demon King also apologized. However, the monster kings of the 10 great sacred grounds had all resorted to some methods in order to escape. But now that everything was in the past, Bai Xiaoli did not pursue the matter any further. Ancient Pot Demon King came before Lin Yu and cupped his hands, saying, Thank you for your help. His attitude was very sincere. From now on, your business is my business, Ancient Vase Demon King said directly. Ancient Vase Demon King had witnessed Lin Yu's talent with his own eyes. It wasn't just the inner world of the 9 layers. It had already been designed to be a taboo among taboos. If Lin Yu continued to grow, his final realm might be the highest. He was worthy of such treatment from Ancient Pot Demon Monarch. Lin Yu looked at the Ancient Pot Demon King and said, I have a favor to ask. What is it? Ancient Pot Demon King frowned. His current strength had not yet recovered. If Lin Yu asked him to solve some problems now, he was afraid that it would be difficult to complete. I need a drop of your blood essence, Lin Yu said directly. He prepared it for Lin Yuan. The blood essence of a monster king was no small matter. For Lin Yuan, the benefits were huge. Ancient Pot Demon King hesitated for a while. Now that his strength had not yet recovered and his body was in a weak state, a drop of blood essence was very important to him. But thinking that he had already escaped, he immediately agreed readily, saying, Young friend, you saved me. A drop of blood essence is nothing. As he spoke, the gourd vibrated. A wisp of golden blood appeared and floated in front of Lin Yu. Lin Yu sealed it in a clay jar and put it into his body. Ancient Pot Demon King now needed to rest. Lin Yu and the other 2 did not stay and returned to the 10-direction world. Even though Lin Yu was fine with it, it was a huge drain for Bai Xiaoli. Now that Bai Xiaoli's strength had begun to recover, and she had mastered a part of the Supreme Tao laws, Lin Yu's God King's token had no obvious effect on her injuries. Supremes were immortal and indestructible. Time could hardly affect them. Now, except for some unimaginable items such as clay jars, the rest could hardly affect them. Bai Xiaoli needed some time to recover. The monster kings of the other sacred grounds also sensed that Ancient Pot Demon King had escaped. Is that kid here? The monster kings were filled with doubt and shock. There was a connection between the 10 sacred grounds. A monster king's escape was no small matter. They naturally sensed it. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. The monster kings of the other sacred grounds gradually became anxious. Is he going to break his promise? The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground asked. Just as he was suspicious, Lin Yu and the others' auras appeared here. This time, Lin Xiu didn't come because of his special body. He couldn't help much here. Bai Xiaoli imparted a cultivation technique to him that could solve the hidden problems in his body. Now, Lin Xiu was also cultivating in the 10-direction world. He hoped that through the cultivation technique, he could completely get rid of the remnant strange matter in his body. This was a seed. If he didn't handle it well, it would germinate in his body. At that time, Lin Xiu might really fall into darkness and become the biggest anomaly in the universe. That was extremely dangerous. Fortunately, Bai Xiaoli had a solution. However, it was just a trial and no one had actually cultivated it. This cultivation technique was deduced by a few supremes. It was extremely mysterious. In the previous battle in history, it was too rushed and no one had tested it. Bai Xiaoli and Lin Yu appeared in the Nirvana sacred ground. The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground sensed it from afar. At this moment, the altar was shaking. Little friend, you're finally here. The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground said kindly, I've been waiting for a long time. He already knew that the ancient vase demon king had broken free with the help of Lin Yu and was now recuperating. They had been trapped for countless years and were lonely. Moreover, their strength was constantly being absorbed by the altar. It was unbearable. Now that there was a chance to break free, how could they not be excited? Why? Don't you recognize me? Bai Xiaoli said with disdain. Old fox. No, Bai Xiaoli, you're here too. Hurry and take a seat. The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground laughed. Changing the rudder according to the wind was very fast. Do you even have a place to sit? Bai Xiaoli was disdainful. Your condition is better than the ancient vase demon king. You should have gathered a lot of strength during the years of being sealed. It should be easier for you. Lin Yu spoke. His tone was serious. The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground became serious and said, Indeed. You can try. After the first time he unsealed the ancient vase demon king. Lin Yu already had experience. This time, it was a few months later because Bai Xiaoli needed to recuperate. Since that's the case, I'll have to trouble the two of you. The monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground said politely. Now that he met him, he no longer had the arrogance that he had when Lin Yu first came. The appearance of 3 items at the same time had the monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground startled. No wonder the ancient vase demon king could break free. So that's the case. With these 3 items, there's no need to worry about the seal not being broken. The joy of the monster king of the Nirvana sacred ground was evident in his words. Chapter 1294. In the Nirvana Holy Land, a terrifying scene was revealed. After the previous experience, Lin Yu raised his hand and condensed his strongest technique. Because the seal here was too strong, Lin Yu and the others could only break it with brute force. This consumed a huge amount of energy. After the previous experience, Bai Xiaoli had to recuperate for a few months before her strength recovered slightly. And what he controlled was the main artifact to break the seal, the clay jar. The pressure he was under was no doubt enormous. Even the Nirvana Monster King had noticed this. But fortunately, the Nirvana Monster King's strength was still preserved. Now, he was destroying the seal from the inside. The seal was gradually being destroyed. But because the power to break the seal was too vast, the entire Nirvana Holy Land was almost in a half-destroyed state. Even the sky was collapsing. In the end, the Nirvana Monster King escaped. Lin Yu asked for a Monster King's blood essence from him. Although the Nirvana Monster King's strength was preserved well, he still needed to spend a long time to recuperate. Lin Yu and Bai Xiaoli rested for a while. In the end, they rescued the bitter sea monster king and the others. Lin Yu spent nearly 100 years on this trip. The aura of the 10 monster kings reappeared in the world. Vaguely, the 10 holy lands became mysterious. It was as if all the heavenly secrets here were covered. This was the result of the Tao law emitted by the 10 monster kings. It was also deliberately done because their strength had not fully recovered. From Lin Yu, they learned that some of those strange creatures had already invaded the universe to prevent accident. It was unknown how many of them had been controlled in the universe. In the 10-square world, Lin Yu and Bai Xiaoli were having a secret discussion. After I leave this time, I hope you can protect the 12 universes for a while. Lin Yu said without hiding anything. Although it seemed that the threats of the other universes had been removed by Lin Yu now. However, some of the deeper, dormant threats were still unknown. With Lin Yu's current energy, he did not have the time to solve them. No problem, Bai Xiaoli said. However, before Lin Yu left, he also reminded him, "You have the secret of the pottery jar. It's best if you don't let anyone else know." The secrets of the pottery jar were too terrifying. Right now, in the land of origin at the limits of Realm C, the specific situation was unknown. It was best not to trust anyone for the time being. Speaking of which, now, Lin Yuan had also recovered from refining Bai Xiaoli's blood essence. His body was exuding a strong demonic aura, which had almost surpassed that of an ordinary divine king realm great demon. He was now in the half-martial progenitor realm, and after refining Bai Xiaoli's blood essence, his eyes flickered with a flicker. His divine will had become much stronger and had surpassed his cultivation base. This was also the effect of Bai Xiaoli's blood essence. Bai Xiaoli's divine will was the strongest among the 10 demon kings. It had already been branded into his blood essence. Therefore, the current Lin Yuan has also benefited from it. His soul consciousness had reached the original God realm. Lin Yuan's cultivation path was different from Lin Yu and the others. He did not deliberately comprehend the Tao law, but from the blood essence that he had refined, he comprehended it and turned it into his own use. And now, after comprehending Bai Xiaoli's blood essence, his body had the unique aura of the original God realm. It was just that his own strength had not reached it yet. They prepared to return to the 12 universes. After everything was done, Lin Yu was ready to set off. The threat of the Black Calamity had not been completely eliminated. He could not relax in the slightest. In the main hall, Lin Yu gave the blood essence of the 10 demon kings to Lin Yuan. Then he announced, "I'm going to leave the 12 universes for a while." He said to the people below, "Divine King Lin, where are you going?" Qin Wunyan and the others had a melancholy look on their faces. Lin Yu's time of return, to be precise, was only a few years. The rest of the time, he was elsewhere. Now, he had just returned and was preparing to leave again. "The end of the Realm C, the land of origin," Lin Yu replied faintly. At this time, the great sun-boundless Buddha and the others were in the main hall, temporarily putting down the matters at hand. Everyone was melancholy, making the atmosphere in the main hall very oppressive for a while. Some people might not have heard of the Realm C and the land of origin, but from Lin Yu's tone, it was definitely not a good place. This was because Lin Yu wanted to go there alone this time. Goddess Yuqing understood very well that this also meant that Lin Yu himself did not have any confidence. "We will respect Divine King Lin's decision together." Great sun-boundless Buddha cupped his hands and said. The dark priest also shouted in agreement. They all knew Lin Yu's thoughts. Now, in the entire universe, there was nothing that could support Lin Yu's rapid advancement. In the battle before ancient history, the great Tao of the universe had almost collapsed. Now, many divine objects had disappeared. Or the heroes before ancient history had found them and taken them away. Only in the land of origin, there might be many powerhouses or amazing divine objects. After the announcement, no one raised any objections. They knew that Lin Yu's purpose of this trip was mainly for them. In order to give them a real prosperous era, Lin Yu had been working hard for it. Leaving the main hall, outside the bedroom, Lin Yu stood in the courtyard. Qin Yi stood at the side, her eyes were gloomy. For her, this was just a reunion, and now they had to part again. When you come back, I will give you a surprise. Goddess Yuqing stood beside Lin Yu and said with a smile. Really? Lin Yu turned his head. He also knew what it was and said, It seems that I am going to be a father. Lin Yu had already sensed that there was a small life in Goddess Yuqing's body, and its aura was gradually revealing. There was a doting look in Goddess Yuqing's eyes. After reaching Lin Yu's realm, it was already very difficult to leave behind a bloodline. Therefore, the gestation time was also very long. However, as long as it was born, it would be a genius of the world. I should think about him. Lin Yu went into seclusion for a while. When he came out, he took out 2 tokens. This was the ancient token that Lin Yu refined by using his own space-time law and part of the power of the King of God's decree. It contained the power of the King of God's decree. It could be used to protect the owner at a critical moment. Lin Yu gave one to Goddess Yuqing and handed the other to Qin Yi. 100 years had passed. Although Qin Yi had broken through to the Divine King realm, with the recovery of the world, the Divine King realm was no longer the top. It would be difficult for her to protect herself in a real turmoil. In the next 2 years, Lin Yu arranged some things after his death. At the same time, he also accompanied Goddess Yuqing and Qin Yi for a while. It was time to go to the Realm Sea. Under the reluctant gazes of the crowd, Yi Zichen looked at Yi Zichen. Lin Yu's figure gradually became illusory and disappeared from the 12 universes. Chapter 1295. Not Heaven was a divine art. Under the support of Lin Yu's time and space Tao law, its speed had become incomparably terrifying. It didn't take long for him to arrive at the first universe. He didn't stop and went straight to Realm Sea. Terrifying waves slammed into the first universe. Ancient tombs could still be seen floating within. There were already broken original stars. It was as if every wave represented an era, and every drop of water was a world. The power emitted from it was extremely terrifying, as if it could devour everything. No one knew the era when Realm Sea was born. However, it was terrifying, and it had always been revered by living beings. Lin Yu stood on the shore of Realm Sea for a long time. Someone was guarding the shore of Realm Sea and paying attention to the changes in Realm Sea. He discovered Lin Yu's figure and couldn't help but report. However, before Celestial Venerable Hao, Demon Ancestor, and the others arrived, Lin Yu stepped into it. He rode on his sword, and the stone sword was under his feet, resisting the devouring power of Realm Sea. No one knew what was in Realm Sea. Celestial Venerable Hao and the others were shocked. Lin Yu is actually going to enter Realm Sea. His current combat power is already invincible in the 12 universes. Perhaps he is seeking a greater breakthrough. Celestial Venerable Hao said slowly. However, this was only his guess. However, no matter what, with his strength, perhaps he can be of some help to those who are advancing in the land of origin. Demon Ancestor said in a low voice. No matter what his motive was, Lin Yu dared to enter Realm Sea alone. That was a great boldness that was worthy of admiration. Although Lin Yu's personality is very unyielding, his character is worthy of admiration. At this moment, Celestial Venerable Hao couldn't help but say. Although he and Lin Yu had a grudge against each other. However, when he thought about how Lin Yu alone made the once unknown and weak 12 universes rise up in such a short period of time, and now he was entering Realm Sea alone. Realm Sea carried endless mysteries. Even in the ancient books, there were no accurate records. There were quite a few living beings who had been completely lost in this place. Moreover, Lin Yu didn't have the exact coordinates. If he went in like this, It was very likely that he wouldn't be able to return. He watched as Lin Yu's figure gradually disappeared into the distance. The people of the first universe didn't say anything. Within the realm sea, Lin Yu glanced at Daoist Jie-in, who was within the raging wave. He didn't go forward, but stepped over the city wall. Now, he could be considered to have truly entered realm sea. Without the protection of the city wall, the aura here had become even more majestic. Even the alchemy universe couldn't withstand it and was about to be completely destroyed by the huge waves. After seeing the grandness of the universe, now that he saw the realm sea, only then did Lin Yu truly understand what was called eternal and indestructible. The universe might be destroyed one day. However, realm sea wouldn't. Realm sea didn't belong to the first cosmos. It was like a giant board embedded in the first cosmos. Being eroded by the realm sea, the territory of the first universe was constantly being eroded. After a long time, the first universe that looked like it was now was actually less than half of what it was back then. This was also the reason why Daoist Jie-in's true spirit was suppressed in the realm sea. If time continued to pass, the entire first universe might be swallowed up by the realm sea. It was just that Daoist Jie-in's existence in establishing the city wall was only a slight obstruction to the realm sea. It was difficult for it to have any substantial effect. In the endless realm sea, Lin Yu was lonely. In front of and behind him was the boundless water of the realm sea. Even the coffin couldn't be seen anymore. Above the realm sea, the old scene of the universe that was already broken hung. In the void, there were original stars that had already turned into powder. Here, it was still the former territory of the first universe. Above, there was a fault in the universe boundary. This part of the realm sea seemed to have rushed into the first universe and was embedded there. It took Lin Yu several decades just to walk out of this place. Tao laws and glorious energy no longer existed here. It seemed to have a natural suppressive effect on living beings. The road ahead was vast and boundless. It almost made one despair. There was no end in sight. Lin Yu was still advancing alone. His Tao heart was tough. Naturally, his Tao heart wouldn't collapse because of decades of loneliness. But if this continued for a long time, perhaps an ordinary living being would have long gone crazy. He didn't know if the path forward was correct or not, nor did he know how far there was still. However, Lin Yu didn't show any anxiety. Because he knew that the realm sea was endless. If he wanted to reach the opposite shore of the realm sea, it probably wouldn't be that simple. Occasionally, waves drowned Lin Yu. His body overflowed with the radiance of the original God realm, blocking everything. It was unknown how much time had passed. Lin Yu was still dressed in white clothes, untainted by a speck of dust. At this time, he was already an extremely long distance away from the first universe. Even if a divine king realm spent several thousand years, it would still be difficult to reach. As he continued to go deeper, the fluctuations above the realm sea also became more and more terrifying. There was no wind in the realm sea, but the waves rose from who knows where, extremely terrifying. By now, practically even ancestor realm cultivators couldn't resist anymore. Lin Yu's expression was calm, but now, he started to worry for Ancestor Lu, who entered the realm sea many years ago. When he entered here, Ancestor Lu was merely Ancestor Realm. And when he arrived here, the waves above the realm sea were already so terrifying. Perhaps the Ancestor Lu back then had a relatively safe route. Lin Yu guessed like this. Ancestor Lu wasn't an arrogant person. He should have some kind of preparation. That was why he entered the realm sea. Otherwise, with Ancestor Lu's realm, it should be difficult to advance here. At this time, in the waves, Lin Yu saw many broken fragments of artifacts. Among them, there was no lack of supreme aura. Even in the present era, coupled with the constant erosion of the realm sea, it was difficult to completely erase the aura on them. However, the Tao laws on them were already dim, only leaving behind a trace of aura. Lin Yu's perception of this was extremely intense, because he had more than one supreme artifact on him. Lin Yu had always been on the surface of the sea. He only saw the waves attack. Lin Yu grabbed one of the fragments of an artifact. It was unknown what metal it was made of. Under the corrosion of the realm sea, it was already impossible to tell what this artifact was before. It was like a lump of iron. However, when Lin Yu grabbed it, it seemed to have the power of the immortal realm, constantly emitting. Even the current Lin Yu, who was in the original God realm, still felt the aura that made his heart palpitate. At this time, the stone sword beneath his feet shook. It seemed to have a desire for this fragment of an artifact. Do you hope to obtain this fragment? Lin Yu looked at the stone sword beneath his feet. He knew that in the battle in the past, the true spirit of the stone sword was completely destroyed. There were also many gaps on the sword body. Now, in the stone sword, the artifact spirit of the Emperor's sword sent out bits of consciousness, wanting to refine this metal. Lin Yu placed the fist-sized metal on the body of the stone sword. He saw that the metal was being fused, slowly coming to the sword hilt, filling up the gap. The metal was quickly assimilated by the stone sword, but it only filled up the gap a little. If one didn't look carefully, it was almost impossible to see. Lin Yu wasn't anxious, because in the waves, Lin Yu saw more than one piece of this metal. It seemed to be the remains of some great figure in the past after his artifact was shattered. Lin Yu stood in the middle of the waves, constantly searching. In the end, he used the power of space to absorb 7 more pieces of metal of different sizes. Chapter 1296. They were all given to the stone sword. After refining these few pieces of metal, the gap on the stone sword was also partially repaired. However, there was still a long way to go before it could be completely repaired. After going through the waves this time, Yi Zichen the realm sea was peaceful for another 100 years. Lin Yu had been comprehending his own Tao law. At the same time, he was controlling the power of the stone sword. The mysterious power that could take over the Tao fruit was displayed on him. Although there were no cultivation materials here. But as Lin Yu continued to cut off his future Tao fruit, in 1,000 years, he had already broken through to the middle stage of the original God realm. However, he did not continue to cut off the chains of Tao and truth on his future Tao fruit, because this seemed to involve some kind of great karma. It was not something Lin Yu could touch with his current realm. He vaguely felt some kind of suppression, as if it was going to cut him off. If it wasn't for the fact that Tao no longer existed in the realm sea, perhaps he would have already been punished. Perhaps if I go forward a little more, I can still try in the depths of the realm sea. Lin Yu thought. He wanted to use the characteristic of the realm sea where Tao did not exist to further liberate his future Tao fruit. This way, his own strength wouldn't stop because he was crossing the realm sea. Time passed quickly. Lin Yu was as calm as an ancient well, until a scene suddenly appeared in front of him. Have we arrived? Lin Yu muttered. In front of him was a land with dense mist. Immortal qi pervaded the air. However, Lin Yu vaguely had a bad premonition in his heart. It was as if there was something on that land that could threaten him. Lin Yu also felt that this was not the land of origin. When he came to the realm sea, Lin Yu had flipped through ancient books. At the same time, he also learned some secrets about the realm sea from Bai Xiaoli. However, whether it was the ancient books or Bai Xiaoli's words, they did not mention that there was such a land on the way to the land of origin. This made Lin Yu very puzzled. However, since he was already here, Lin Yu's heart was filled with doubts as he continued forward. He needed to confirm his current coordinates, whether or not he was already lost in Realm C. If that was really the case, then Lin Yu's path had completely deviated. That was an extremely terrifying thing. There was no end to Realm C. Even if you're at the original God realm, you will get lost in there. You won't be able to find the way back. From then on, your figure will never appear in the history book. Lin Yu continued to move towards the land. However, as Lin Yu approached the land, it seemed to be getting further and further away. He maintained a certain distance from Lin Yu. It was like a mirage, giving people a feeling that it was unreachable. An illusion. Lin Yu muttered to himself. However, he quickly rejected this idea. Among the 4 ancient characters he had mastered, the third one could see through all the illusions in the world. And this land was definitely real, but it seemed to have some kind of mysterious power that made it difficult for Lin Yu to get close. 1 year later, Lin Yu didn't continue to try to move forward. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the stone sword. It's not the island that's moving. It's me that's always in the same place, Lin Yu said slowly. At this moment, he opened his eyes. A bright light flashed and disappeared. He stood up. The space-time power on his body spread around his body. During the year of fighting against the land, Lin Yu's comprehension of Tao law had increased by another level. Not heaven needs to leave a mark. However, under the support of my Tao law, this point can be ignored in a short distance, Lin Yu said indifferently. Once again, he comprehended another theurgy. This was his comprehension of not heaven. Worlds end near. Lin Yu calmly took a step forward. However, he disappeared on the spot. When they met again, he was already close to the land. On the majestic land there were huge reefs on the shore. If one looked carefully, they were actually made of primitive stars. It was as if they were refined by some living creature, and then placed around the land to resist the corrosive power of the realm sea. The new divine ability that Lin Yu created, Worlds End Near, had its effect. Now, he was close to the island. Once again, he cast it. There was no time to blink. It was as if Lin Yu directly surpassed the bindings of time and space. At the same time, he appeared in another place. It was very mysterious. The extreme of speed was originally time. Now, Lin Yu used the laws of space to increase not heaven's speed to a terrifying level. This was definitely a sharp weapon in a battle. The moment he attacked, he would appear in front of the enemy. There was no time to defend at all. Lin Yu was now on the reef. There was a feeling of being grounded. This was something that he hadn't experienced for many years. However, Lin Yu didn't relax at all. Only when he saw the full appearance of the land here did he know that this was a huge island. However, he didn't know why it appeared in the realm sea. Lin Yu entered the island. Lin Yu had a strange feeling. It was as if he had a familiar feeling about this island. It seemed to have some similarities with the 3 immortal islands on Earth. Lin Yu now knew that the 3 immortal islands on Earth had great secret. They were established on Earth by an unimaginable big shot back then. They seemed to have been evolving. Could it be that the blueprint of the 3 immortal islands back then came from here? Lin Yu couldn't help but wonder. The stone sword appeared in Lin Yu's hand. They passed through a dense jungle. The plants here were ones that Lin Yu had never seen before. It seemed that back then, they had already condensed spiritual intelligence. However, for some reason, the spiritual intelligence of the plants here no longer existed. Even the roots were charred black. However, they were growing very luxuriantly. Other than the jungle, Lin Yu didn't see any other living creatures with signs of life. It was as if the plants here were the only ones on the island. He still couldn't find any energy or substance. Although the area here was a little open, Lin Yu felt a heavy sense of oppression in his heart. He was blocked by a huge mountain range in front of him. The rocks were rugged and no plants could be seen on it. The plants here only existed on the periphery of the island. Lin Yu stepped onto the mountain range. At this time, the panoramic view of the entire island appeared in front of Lin Yu. He saw that this mountain range was a ring that wrapped around the inside. The land inside was barren. Even the light was swallowed. Yellow soil was everywhere, bringing with it a sense of desolation and silence. Lin Yu stood on the mountain range with some kind of palpitating feeling. It seemed that this mountain range was once a living creature. It was like a soaring snake that was boundless. Lin Yu stood on top of it. It was as if he was on the vein of the universe. That sense of desolation and loneliness seemed to have affected Lin Yu. The snake's head bit the snake's tail. The entire mountain range seemed to be devouring each other. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes gradually filled up. The strong power of karma spread out in Lin Yu's heart. This triggered Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life. That layer of the inner world actually appeared on its own. The golden lotus within it emitted some kind of mysterious Tao law. Lin Yu didn't know what kind of Tao law his previous life's Tao fruit had grasped. When he went upstream from the long river of time, he saw himself from his previous life. At that time, he said that the Tao law he grasped didn't seem to be weaker than the Tao law of time and space. Now, it was finally appearing on the surface. After Lin Yu saw the ring-shaped mountain range, he had some kind of realization in his heart that triggered his previous life's Tao fruit. At this time, the endless golden light almost lit up the entire island. The entire mountain range was trembling slightly. At this time, a mysterious aura rushed out of the snake-shaped mountain range. It directly came to the layer of the inner world that Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit had turned into. At this time, there seemed to be an aura on the island that sensed the movements outside. At this time, it was awakening. A pair of decaying arms stretched out from the ground of the desolate land surrounded by the mountain range. Chapter 1297. It carried the power of decay, but the hands were eerily pale. Lin Yu could tell that it was a pair of men's hands, but they were paler than a woman's and looked sickly. "You've finally come for it, but why did you disturb my sleep?" At this moment, the hands beneath the ground had already pushed aside the yellow soil, revealing the upper body of that person. The aura of decay shrouded Lin Yu's body. Lin Yu immediately felt a chill down his spine, as if his divine sense and battle physique were about to be destroyed at the same time. It was only the aura of the owner of the hands, yet it had already caused such a terrifying outcome. The Tao fruit of Lin Yu's past life had returned to Lin Yu's body to protect him from the serious consequences. "Who are you?" Lin Yu was slightly shocked. The living being was too terrifying. Even the first ancient word of origin that he had mastered did not transmit any information when he entered this place. The living being was not affected by the ancient word of origin's deduction. It had already surpassed the 5 elements and was no longer in history. Lin Yu had a bad premonition in his heart. This living being was most likely the living utmost being. I see. I didn't expect so much time to have passed. Have you already passed away in that era? The living being stood up. He was wearing a rotten black robe with some kind of runes intertwined on it. His black hair was draped over his shoulders with a feminine beauty. Even though he had been buried in the soil for countless years, his face still did not have the slightest mark. This type of expert was already truly difficult for the heavens to bury, difficult for the earth to overturn, transcending history, breaking free from the category of living creatures. With just a glance, Lin Yu could only resist with all his strength. Lin Yu's Tao fruit of the 3 lives resonated. It was currently resisting the man's aura. The man was expressionless, as if nothing in the world could move him. Even after seeing Lin Yu's Tao fruit of the 3 lives, his expression did not change at all. He was like a corpse, and as he slowly opened his mouth, he spoke the language of an extremely ancient era. Lin Yu could only use his divine sense to know what it meant. "You have embarked on this path," he said calmly. Lin Yu was a little confused. This was what he had said after seeing his 3-era Tao fruit. Could it be that in ancient history, someone has set foot on this path? Lin Yu couldn't help but have some doubts. Since ancient times, the number of people who grasped spacetime Tao law could be counted on one's fingers. From what Lin Yu knew, only his first ancestor had walked extremely far on this path. Could First Ancestor have also stepped onto this path back then? Lin Yu couldn't help but guess. The man knew what Lin Yu was thinking, but he didn't explain. Instead, he continued to stare at Lin Yu and said, "Have you not given up on the disappointed universe?" he asked in a questioning tone. However, his words made Lin Yu a little confused. Now Lin Yu understood. This man might have known him in his previous life, and now he was talking to his Tao fruit of his previous life. Under the terrifying pressure, the golden lotus formed by Lin Yu's Tao fruit of his previous life trembled. After absorbing the aura of the mountain range, it became increasingly mysterious and unfathomable. It directly rushed out of Lin Yu's body. It took root in the yellow soil. Clear air rose and a slender figure appeared. It was Lin Yu from his previous life. However, there seemed to be many intertwined chains of Tao and reason on his body, making it difficult to break free. Back then, you were like me, leaving that ignorant universe and creating a forbidden zone. How did you end up like this? The man sat down cross-legged. He had no ill intentions towards Lin Yu. He seemed to have a close relationship with his previous life. At this moment, he slowly opened his mouth, but he didn't get a response from his previous life's Tao fruit. To be precise, it wasn't that there was no response, but that Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit had spoken. However, all the secrets of heaven were deceived. Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit didn't belong to this era. Even if it was in the realm C now, it was still difficult for it to truly manifest. Such a situation, lamentable and pitiful. The man shook his head. He pointed out a finger. The island was unharmed, but the surrounding realm C was directly exploding, forming a vacuum zone that was even larger than a universe, and it couldn't be restored for a long time. On Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit, the intertwined chains of Tao and reason were constantly being shattered. This was only temporary. He was helping Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit to escape. The chains intertwined with Tao and reason were nothing in front of this man. With a casual flick of his finger, the chains crumbled inch by inch. No matter how desperate it is, we still have to try. Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit spoke. There was a hint of sadness in his voice. An ancient corpse that had passed away appeared in front of Lin Yu. In the past, his first ancestor had forcefully refined that long river of time and placed it in his tomb. As a result, the living beings of later generations were missing that part of history. And now, the most important ancient corpse was being described by Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit and the man. Those people back then weren't worth it. The destruction of the entire world was also deserved. The man continued to speak. Lin Yu didn't know what happened back then, but he still obtained some information from the discussion between the two. It seemed that there was a problem in the universe back then. Otherwise, this man wouldn't have chosen to take the initiative to turn into a forbidden zone and sleep in the endless realm sea. Lin Yu's previous life's Tao fruit shook his head and said, "Burial Tao Master, you and I are both right. It's just that our paths are different." At this time, Burial Tao Master didn't respond. The people of the world back then were too disappointing, so much so that Burial Tao Master left the universe and the land of origin in anger. In the end, he chose to sleep in the realm sea. At the same time, Lin Yu also thought that in the 12 universes back then, there were probably more than 12 supreme beings. At the very least, Burial Tao Master wasn't the first divine king of the known universe. The words that followed were covered by an aura, so Lin Yu couldn't hear them. The two seemed to be discussing the Tao. The realm sea in this area was shaking because of this, and the seawater that represented the eras and worlds were constantly evaporating. 100 years passed like this. This place was already filled with two terrifying Tao laws. At the same time, two supreme techniques also appeared in Lin Yu's heart. This was the aura of the laws that overflowed from the two's discussion of the Tao. At this time, it was reflected in the cracks in the surrounding space, and was absorbed by Lin Yu. An incomparably mysterious aura spread in Lin Yu's heart. This was different from any of the techniques that he had cultivated. Both of these unparalleled skills represented a path that had been taken by the utmost beings. They could lead a living being to the supreme realm. Moreover, Lin Yu's previous life and burial Tao Master had stepped into the supreme realm extremely far. Burial Tao Master was the only supreme that Lin Yu knew who had lived to the present era. The Tao laws on his body were even more terrifying under the polishing of time. Now, in the process of the two's discussion of the Tao at the beginning, it was almost in a crushing position. Chapter 1298. However, gradually, Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life began to emit boundless light, illuminating a large area of the realm sea. The waves within surged, and in the end, they inexplicably fell into a strange state. An unknown string began to appear between heaven and earth, connecting everything in the world. Only Lin Yu stood on the mountain range, unaffected. After fusing with the bodies of 3 lives, he had transcended and had a certain supreme characteristic. Lin Yu began to comprehend the 2 techniques, and the sound of chanting came from his present life's Tao fruit. In the inner world where his present life's Tao fruit was, many threads gradually appeared, containing the truths of heaven and earth. The person under the ancient tree began to sit cross-legged, and a chessboard appeared in front of him. Black chi crisscrossed, intertwined on it. Like a coffin, it carried a mysterious aura that was different from the strange. The Go board was a manifestation of Lin Yu's understanding of Daolord Burial Daolord's magic, and it was a manifestation of his present life Tao fruit. As for those faintly discernible threads, they turned into a crisscrossing net on the chessboard. The 2 supreme auras combined together, emitting a terrifying aura. However, there were no chess pieces on it. Even so, it seemed to be evolving millions of changes, making it difficult to deduce. 300 years passed just like that. The atmosphere of the Tao discussion here gradually calmed down. At this time, Burial Path Master's figure appeared. His face was still calm as he said, "I didn't expect your Tao technique to have reached such a level." He was not stingy with his praise. "After sleeping for so long, you haven't improved much." Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life was disappointed. Burial Path Master only glanced at Lin Yu indifferently. He had already sensed that Lin Yu had comprehended his Tao technique. However, he did not pay too much attention to it. "Do you think your present life will walk the same path as mine?" Burial Path Master asked. His Tao technique was very mysterious. Perhaps it could affect a person from the origin. That was why he asked Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life. Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life shook his head gently. He deliberately did this to let Lin Yu comprehend Burial Path Master's technique. However, it was up to Lin Yu to decide how to proceed from here on out. Lin Yu's Tao fruit had almost reached its limit. Could not exist forever in the world. It only appeared now because of Burial Path Master. After all, Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life had completely passed away. What was left now was only a reflection. Since you have mastered that kind of Tao law, you should know what the consequences of comprehending a supreme technique are, Burial Path Master said slowly. Lin Yu's Tao fruit from his previous life dissipated and returned to his body. He did not answer Burial Path Master. After a long time, Burial Path Master looked at Lin Yu and let out a long sigh. He seemed to be able to see a corner of the future from Lin Yu. "The path ahead is chaotic. I only see you moving forward alone. Seems like you will not succeed in this world." Burial Path Master finished. He sat on the ground and looked at an unknown place in the world sea. "Who can say for sure about the future?" Lin Yu said. Time was hard to touch. Even if the utmost beings could see a corner of the truth through the river of time, it was not the whole picture. Seeing Lin Yu answer him, Burial Path Master turned around. Burial Path Master turned around and shook his head. You don't understand the attitude of the people you want to save. Burial Path Master said, do you know why the utmost beings of the past passed away? Burial Path Master told Lin Yu about the history of the past. Lin Yu listened. When the time comes, you will know that it is not worth it to protect those people. Why don't you follow me and create a forbidden zone? Burial Path Master continued. Under Burial Path Master's aura, Lin Yu seemed to have seen a corner of the future. But it was very blurry. He stood at the top, but he could only see his wife and children passing away one by one. They did not die of strange things, but were killed by the living beings of the universe who surrendered to the darkness. Lin Yu's heart stirred. After the scene completely disappeared, Lin Yu closed his eyes for a long time. When he opened them again, he said slowly, if that is the case, I might make the same choice as you. Lin Yu said calmly. He was not a selfless person. On the contrary, he could kill billions of living beings to protect the people around him. Even if he had to bear great karma, he would not hesitate. Burial Path Master did not speak anymore. Senior, I will take my leave first. Lin Yu cupped his hands and bid farewell. After going to the island, Lin Yu sighed in his heart. He continued to control the stone sword and moved forward. He didn't know why he had come here by chance. However, what he saw and heard made him have a trace of doubt in his heart. He began to question what exactly happened in the battle before the ancient history. He needed to gradually understand it himself. Is this the person that Lin Xian mentioned? Burial Path Master murmured, this is the most desperate life. Without the Supreme, who can resist the strange things? His voice was long and seemed to penetrate the long river of history, spreading to every corner of the river of time. Tao Burial Master was trying to deduce something or someone. However, as time passed, he did not get the result he wanted. He fell into a deep sleep again. The island gradually disappeared in the realm sea, as if it had never appeared. After the Tao fruit of the current life returned to Lin Yu's inner world. At this moment, there seemed to be some mysterious changes in his inner world. An egg appeared beside the golden lotus. It seemed to be nurturing some kind of living being. Lin Yu could clearly sense the aura on it. It came from the snake-like mountain range on the island. Its aura was nourishing that layer of inner world, causing it to become even more unfathomable. Lin Yu calmed his mind. He sat cross-legged on the stone sword. After comprehending two types of skills at the same time, Lin Yu's aura had become more extraordinary. He was like a god that had transcended the world. He walked above the endless realm sea. There was no concept of time here. Within the realm sea there were endless mysteries. Even the utmost beings of the past weren't able to uncover all of the mysteries within. Occasionally, there would be waves of unknown origin. Lin Yu could defend against them with a wave of his hand. The current Lin Yu could definitely be called the #1 person in the original God realm. He had the skills of many supreme beings on him at the same time. At the same time, he had clearly grasped many Tao laws. This was a situation that had never happened before in the ancient history. Just as Lin Yu was in a state of calmness, a strange phenomenon appeared in front of him. A fog appeared, blocking the probing of his consciousness. Even Lin Yu's Tao laws were devoured by it. Chapter 1299. Lin Yu opened his eyes at this moment. There was a fog in front of him. It enveloped the endless sea. The mist seemed to be still. It was very strange. Time seemed to have stopped here. It was in an eternity and an instant, unchanging since time immemorial. If he wanted to continue forward, he could only pass through this fog. However, Lin Yu had never heard from Bai Xiaoli that there was such a strange fog on the way to the land of origin. Did I break away from the path to the land of origin, or did this fog appear in the future? Lin Yu stopped and muttered to himself. However, there was no path forward. Only by entering this fog could he know everything. After observing for a period of time, Lin Yu chose to enter. Lin Yu controlled the stone sword and his figure disappeared into it. Not a single trace was left behind. Lin Yu's entry didn't cause the fog to change at all. It was still. This wasn't an area controlled by the time and space Dao laws. It was strange everywhere. Lin Yu came to an unknown place. Below was still the water of the realm sea. As Lin Yu moved forward, he saw a black sailboat appear in front of him. The sail on it was already broken. It floated aimlessly above the realm sea. Lin Yu looked at the black sailboat. He didn't know what it was made of. The aura of time flowed out from it. The sailboat blocked Lin Yu's divine sense. He approached the sailboat and finally arrived on the deck. The sailboat wasn't big, only able to accommodate 2 or 3 people. The sailboat was moving in a specific direction. Time and space here were still, as if only the sailboat was moving forward. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have realized something under his probing. This sailboat seemed to be made of the same material as the small boat he controlled in his future Dao fruit. It was just a simple material, but it could exist above the realm sea for an unknown period of time. It seemed to be narrating the events of the distant past. The appearance of this wooden material was similar to the shape of his future Dao fruit. It was just an additional tattered sail. Lin Yu realized something and muttered, "Could it be that I've been walking along the path of history and can't escape?" Lin Yu wondered if the appearance of this kind of material was proof of something. In the future, his hair would turn white, and he would become an old man past his prime. He would also have this kind of boat by his side. Would it still be difficult for Lin Yu to escape and rewrite the future even if he combined the Dao fruits of his 3 lives? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. However, Lin Yu's Dao heart was not restricted by the ship's hull. He came to the interior of the sailboat. 2 of the skeletons were still as lustrous as jade, emitting a luster. They all wore bamboo hats and had a chessboard in front of them. However, there was only a black stone at the place of Tian Yuan. One person's white piece had yet to fall, maintaining that position. Lin Yu stood in front of the 2 skeletons. He didn't sense any aura from them, as if these were just 2 ordinary people who had passed away. However, when Lin Yu looked at the 2 skeletons, he had a familiar feeling. He couldn't describe it, but he had a bad premonition in his heart. As the black ship continued to advance, at some unknown time, the stone sword in Lin Yu's hand trembled, as if it sensed some kind of threat. Lin Yu walked out of the cabin. He returned to the deck, only to see a shocking scene appear in front of him. Above the realm sea, a giant stone city appeared at some unknown time. It emitted an ice-cold aura, like a giant beast standing at the end of the horizon. Endless black sailboats appeared in the surroundings of the stone city. Their final destination seemed to be this place. Endless loneliness enveloped Lin Yu's body. Several types of Dao laws surrounded Lin Yu, resisting this aura. It was too shocking. The water of the realm sea was also constantly flowing into the stone city. Every wave in the realm sea was a world, and this stone city was incomparably majestic, enough to see how tall it was. The black sailboats followed the water flow of the realm sea and continuously entered the stone city. A heart-palpitating power was being emitted. Standing on the sailboat, although the stone city had a heart-palpitating feeling, he had a familiar feeling. After arriving here, he seemed to have a feeling of returning home. He didn't know if this was because the stone city had a seductive aura or something else. "Since we're here, let's go in and investigate," Lin Yu said slowly. The premonition in his heart was telling him that he needed to go in and investigate. However, at this moment, the Emperor's sword in his hand was trembling violently, not wanting Lin Yu to enter. This was the warning of a supreme weapon. But here, the stone city had already blocked the path forward. Moreover, when Lin Yu investigated, his body was already out of control, unable to break away from the suction force of the stone city. Around the stone city, there were black sailboats, densely packed, unknown how many there were. There were huge city gates everywhere in the stone city. There were no patterns on them, looking very simple. However, there was a majestic aura. There was already no fog here. The endless fog couldn't enter the 1,000-mile radius of the stone city. This was like the only place since ancient times. What could be seen was a patch of gray. The stone city appeared above the realm sea. It was inevitable that it would reveal something strange. The sailboat's speed was extremely slow. Only, there was no concept of time and space here. Lin Yu didn't know how much time he spent here. The stone sword calmed down at this moment. It was suppressed by the approaching time, no longer trembling. Endless loneliness shrouded Lin Yu's heart. Only with the protection of several Tao laws on his body, it didn't cause fluctuations to appear in his heart. He looked at the sailboat, passing through the huge stone gate and entering the stone city. Space changed in an instant. The scenery here had also changed. Lin Yu had already entered the stone city, only to see that the scene here had already changed. After the sailboat entered the stone city, it bloomed with vitality. The aura of time on it was no longer there, replaced by a brand new aura. This seemed to be a mooring point. An ancient bridge appeared in front of him. The shore paved with bluestone slabs was docked along with the sailboat. A strange scene appeared above. Decaying skeletons, dressed in armor and holding standard decaying weapons, appeared on the shore. As the leading decaying skeleton slapped the rusty sword in its hand on the scabbard, there was a decaying iron sheet rustling down. Among the skeletons on the sailboat, there were cold soul lights appearing. Lanterns appeared in the hands of those decaying skeletons, absorbing the soul lights. They waited until each of the decaying skeletons had collected dozens of soul lights in their hands. The first skeleton turned around. Carrying the lantern in its hand, it crossed the stone bridge and went to the other side. The remaining decaying skeletons followed, crossing the stone bridge. No one knew where they went. They didn't seem to notice Lin Yu's arrival. And just as a decaying skeleton took a step forward, Lin Yu took a step forward, using the stone sword in his hand to cut off its head, took the lantern, and replaced it with the decaying armor of that skeleton. Chapter 1300. After the head was chopped off, the upper and lower jaws of the skull were still opening and closing, making a terrifying sound. Lin Yu didn't care about the immobile skeleton. He followed behind a group of skeletons and crossed the stone bridge. The moment he stepped on the stone bridge, Lin Yu felt as if he was going to the afterlife. It was a very strange feeling. But what he didn't know was, some kind of terrifying change had happened to his body. There was a mark on his forehead that emitted an endless aura of death. It was as if the mark had disappeared the moment he stepped onto the stone bridge. At this moment, the finger of his present life Tao fruit moved slightly. The mark on his forehead slowly dissipated as it was absorbed into his body. Finally, it slowly entered the body of Lin Yu's present life Tao fruit. The mark slowly condensed into a string of beads that wrapped around the wrist of his present life Tao fruit. The endless death chi was suppressed, and a mysterious aura was revealed. Under the constant cleansing of the chanting of sutras, the death chi on the beads was constantly disappearing. However, Lin Yu didn't know about all these changes. When he finally stepped onto the stone bridge, cracks began to appear on the stone bridge that had existed for an unknown amount of time. The mysteries contained within seemed to have disappeared the moment Lin Yu left. Lin Yu followed behind the skeletons. He didn't know how far he had walked. There was no scenery around, only a bluestone road that led to an unknown place. There seemed to be no end in sight. He could only vaguely see a line of gray light at the end of the horizon of this world, vast and unfathomable. After Lin Yu's perception, these skeletons didn't have any consciousness at all, as if they were just mechanically completing some kind of set thing. Lin Yu continued to move forward. There was no other way now. because as he continued to move forward, the road behind him gradually disappeared, shrouded in gray fog, and he couldn't find the way back. It was as if countless years had passed in a hurry. At this moment, the road ahead was cut off. At the end of the road, a stone statue appeared, and it was already covered in dust. He could only vaguely make out that it was a humanoid sculpture. It was about the same size as a normal person. He sat cross-legged at the end of the road. Lin Yu finally understood that the lonely aura of the stone city came from the sculpture. On the wrist of the stone sculpture, there was a bracelet made up of 12 beads. Lin Yu only took one look, and black blood flowed out of the corners of his eyes. He seemed to have vaguely touched upon something. What Lin Yu didn't know was that the bracelet on the stone statue's wrist was very similar to the bracelet on his own Dao fruit. The skeleton arrived and knelt down on the ground. Its upper and lower jaws opened and closed, as if it were chanting scriptures and offering sacrifices to the statue. Then, the lanterns in their hands shattered, and the soul light inside rushed out and entered the stone sculptures. Lin Yu did not kneel, and the lantern in his hand was also shattered. He entered the stone sculpture. After the soul light entered, the stone sculpture didn't undergo any changes. However, after a short while, the soul light appeared from the beads on the wrist of the stone sculpture. The soul light clearly dimmed and was on the verge of disappearing. At this moment, the soul light floated at the front of the broken road. At this moment, it actually transformed into the appearance of living beings. Some of them were strange and indescribable, and there were also humanoid living beings. However, their soul light was already very weak, and at this moment it was like a flame steaming. What was certain was that these living beings had extremely strong bodies. Even now, only a wisp of true spirit was left, and their bodies were emitting a terrifying aura. Lin Yu stared at these transformed soul lights. This was the only light here. It reflected the broken road ahead. But at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly looked at the opposite shore of the broken road. At this moment, a figure actually appeared there. This wasn't formed by soul light, but a living being in the true sense of the word. When Lin Yu fixed his eyes on the figure, he found that the figure was also looking at him. On the opposite shore of the broken road, there was actually another Lin Yu. He stood above the abyss. Endless vicissitudes of life were revealed in his eyes. The corners of his mouth revealed a wisp of a strange smile. When the two people looked at each other, it was extremely strange. At this moment, Lin Yu had already forgotten where he was. After a brief exchange of glances, the Lin Yu on the opposite shore opened and closed his mouth, as if he was saying something to Lin Yu. It was just that the mysteries of heaven here had already been deceived. Lin Yu didn't know what he was saying, and he couldn't make out anything from the shape of his mouth. That Lin Yu turned around and retreated. Lin Yu was left here with doubts in his heart. That Lin Yu on the opposite shore was revealing strangeness everywhere. His black hair draped over his shoulders, and his face was pale, like a dead person. Lin Yu stood here for a long time, pondering what the Lin Yu on the opposite shore was saying to him. Restricted area, bone ashes. Lin Yu could only distinguish the two words in front and behind from the shape of his mouth on the opposite shore. But the words after that couldn't be distinguished. This place suppressed his consciousness and concealed the mysteries of heaven, making it difficult for him to sense the source. He felt pain in his consciousness. If not for the protection of the clay pot, it was very likely that he would have died by now. After Lin Yu calmed his mind, just as he was thinking of how to leave, the remaining few soul lights in Lin Yu's eyes actually turned into the appearance of the Darkness High Priest and the Mahavairakana Buddha. Impossible. Lin Yu looked at the appearance of the two people he was familiar with, and his heart was slightly shocked. It was impossible for the figures of the Darkness High Priest and the Mahavairakana Buddha to appear here. However, the Mahavairakana Buddha and the Darkness High Priest looked different from the ones he was familiar with. The body of the Mahavairakana Buddha shone with black light, and one of his eye sockets was also empty. The limbs of the darkness high priest were also missing, and his hair was disheveled. Both of them were ferocious. The illusory figures of the Mahavairakana Buddha and the darkness high priest came to the top of the abyss and jumped down slowly. Everything happened too quickly, and Lin Yu's consciousness was now blocked, making it difficult for him to react immediately. He wanted to restrain the illusory figures of the Mahavairakana Buddha and the darkness high priest, but he was a step too late. After stepping into the abyss, Lin Yu's cultivation level faded away like the tide. In the end, the illusory figures of the Mahavairakana Buddha and the darkness high priest fell into the abyss. Lin Yu finally understood why he felt a sense of familiarity when he arrived on the sailboat. Out of the two skeletons, one of them was missing 4 limbs. It was similar to the Mahavairakana Buddha and the darkness high priest that he was looking at now. Lin Yu's voice fell rapidly. This place had an aura that made one's heart palpitate. He wanted to catch hold of the Mahavairakana Buddha and the darkness high priest, but he realized that the illusory figures of the two were no longer beside him. Everything fell into darkness. Lin Yu did not know how long he had fallen for. The clay pot was moving rhythmically. At this moment, the stone sword was awakened, and it delayed Lin Yu's descent. In the end, he seemed to have reached the bottom of the abyss. Phosphorescent lights illuminated this dark area, but there was no sign of soul light here. Chapter 1301. Lin Yu had sunk into an unknown place. This place was filled with a strange aura. His body was currently being suppressed. All of his cultivation and divine consciousness had already faded away. This place was not a place where living people should enter. The current Lin Yu seemed to have come into contact with a taboo. Right now, a decaying aura had already appeared on his body. It seemed that he would die at any moment. If it wasn't for the power in his inner world that was continuously absorbing the decaying aura into the pearl on his wrist, Lin Yu would have already suffered a calamity not long ago and would have died directly. Lin Yu didn't sense this. This was because the aura here was simply too strange. It was difficult for others to detect it. Even Lin Yu's inner world was no longer shining. It had already been suppressed to the extreme. Lin Yu looked around vigilantly. The Divine King's token, the stone sword, and the clay jar on his body were warning him at all times. After staying in the same place for some time, Lin Yu moved forward in a direction. He wanted to find the final destination of those soul lights. He knew that the dark divine priest and the others should still be in the universe. However, why would their shadows appear here? This caused Lin Yu to have a bad premonition in his heart. Can this place reflect the people in my heart and turn them into illusions? Or is this really the land of reincarnation? And the Buddha and the others have already. Lin Yu didn't continue guessing. Right now, if he wanted to understand everything, he had to find the final destination of those soul lights. Only then would he be able to verify the thoughts in his heart. Lin Yu continued to move forward. He could only rely on the ghost fire in the space that was constantly emitting phosphorescent light in order to vaguely discern the path ahead. Amidst the endless loneliness, Lin Yu seemed to have stepped on something. At this moment, it broke. Lin Yu lowered his head and looked at it. It was a piece of bone, but it had already decayed for an unknown number of years. With just a little bit of strength, it had already turned into fine powder. Lin Yu looked at the bone. The divinity on it had long disappeared. However, there were still some Tao laws left in the depths, revealing boundless power. When it was alive, there was no doubt that it was extremely powerful. However, Lin Yu didn't stay for long. Now, the phosphorescent light around him was gradually converging in one direction. The place where Lin Yu was standing gradually turned dark. If he didn't follow, he might get lost at the bottom of the endless abyss. Now, the stone sword was completely silent. Only the godly king badge and the jar were still emitting a supreme aura, protecting Lin Yu. Right now, Lin Yu could only hope that the clay pot and the King of Gods badge could protect him in this strange abyss. After arriving at the Realm Sea, Lin Yu had already fallen into danger several times. The inside of the Realm Sea was immeasurable as expected, having many dangers. There were even some that even the King of Gods badge couldn't truly protect him. These situations had never appeared before in the 12 universes. However, Lin Yu didn't show any anxiety. If he wanted to become strong, these dangers were the path he had to take. If everything went smoothly, no matter how terrifying your talent was, in the end, you would just be a pile of yellow soil, difficult to ascend to the great Tao. At this time, Lin Yu followed behind the phosphorescent light, arriving at an unknown place. The phosphorescent light here was flourishing to the extreme. It started to condense, gradually turning into a large green-white sun above the abyss. The light illuminated this place. However, the light was still not bright enough. The entire region was dusky. Lin Yu looked at the surrounding environment. He saw that there were holes everywhere on the stone walls of the abyss, like an ant's nest. However, each hole was bigger than several people. Each hole was incomparably deep. He didn't know where it led to. Lin Yu once again saw the illusory figures condensed by the soul light. They were in front of a clay sculpture, and seemed to have received some kind of guidance, stepping into one of these holes. They seemed to be carrying out rebirth. However, these actions were incomparably strange. Why did they have to come in front of that clay sculpture before choosing which hole to step into? However, the largest holes were the 6 behind the clay sculpture. They emitted the light of ascension. It became the only peaceful place in this region. Lin Yu sized up those 6 holes curiously. He sensed the aura of the universe within them. Why is this place in the depths of the Realm Sea connected to the universe? Lin Yu was puzzled. At this time, he was already completely puzzled. Could it be that this place was left behind by the few Supremes in the past? Lin Yu couldn't help but think this way. Although the aura here was full of strangeness, it didn't have the unique aura of the strange race. At this time, Lin Yu saw that this clay sculpture was different from the stone sculpture he saw before. The clay sculpture's palm was facing upwards. On its right palm, it seemed to be holding a fist-sized stone ball. The Tao marks on it were intertwined, revealing a mystery. Specks of light made the clay sculpture look incomparably sacred. It felt out of place with the environment here. However, the clay sculpture gave people the feeling that it was very ordinary, as if it was made of ordinary yellow mud. Even though it was an ordinary clay sculpture, it was able to bear the power in his hand. Lin Yu approached it. He stared at the stone ball in the clay sculpture's hand. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have understood something. The shape of this stone ball was actually very similar to the appearance of Earth. It could be said that it was almost exactly the same. This is the unimaginable means left behind by the unknown Supremes in the past. Lin Yu was slightly shocked in his heart. He understood that he had really left the Realm Sea. It was very likely that he was already lost in the Realm Sea. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to see these things. First, it was the living utmost being. Now, it was the stone ball of Earth that he had come into contact with the unknown Supremes in the past. Lin Yu's footsteps couldn't move for a moment. Although there was no pressure here, to Lin Yu it was too mysterious. He didn't understand at all. With Lin Yu's current realm, the things that he had seen and heard were already very rich in the 12 universes. However, he didn't have the slightest understanding of this place. He came in front of the clay sculpture. However, when he came to the other side, he could see that half of the clay sculpture's face had been destroyed by a mighty force. The Tao runes on the stone ball in his hand were extremely complicated. They had already intertwined with Tao and reason. Even the stone ball didn't destroy its body. And at some point in time, half of its face had been shattered by someone. Looking at the scar, Lin Yu had a familiar feeling. It was the aura of the first emperor. He could vaguely see the supreme chi that was spreading out continuously. It was as though it could make all living beings kneel down and worship their lord. Why would the first emperor want to destroy this place? Lin Yu was getting more and more confused in his heart. If this place was really created by the legendary supreme being, he shouldn't have any ill intentions towards the living beings of this world. But why would the first emperor choose to attack this place after awakening? For a moment, Lin Yu was really confused. Even though he didn't know how much time had passed, the remaining aura of the first emperor was still supreme. However, in the end, it seemed like due to the urgency of the situation, the first emperor retreated. He didn't know where he went. However, Lin Yu had his own guesses. Since the first emperor back then was extremely terrifying, he should have entered the peak of the origin ground after awakening. If that was the case, he might be able to find the path that the first emperor left from here and leave. Chapter 1302. Lin Yu's eyes gradually lit up. With the support of the clay jar, his strength was gradually recovering. The four ancient characters revolved around him. A mysterious power appeared in Lin Yu's eyes, breaking through all illusions. At the same time, the power of the first ancient character was also deducing the correct path. When he used all of his strength, his expression changed. His expression changed slightly. Every corner of this place was a dead end, including the path he had taken when he came here. But why was he still alive now? Lin Yu began to examine his body, until he saw the inner world where his present Tao fruit was. His expression gradually became strange. Now, he finally noticed that a string of beads had appeared on his wrist in this life's Tao fruit. A dense aura of death was emitted from it. However, it didn't affect Lin Yu at all. His present Tao fruit sat cross-legged in front of the chessboard without any ripples. Even the dense aura of death didn't affect it in the slightest. However, Lin Yu felt a sense of familiarity when he looked at the bead. It was none other than the bead he saw on the stone statue at the end of the path above the abyss. It was very similar to the bead he saw on the stone statue above the abyss. They were both made of 12 beads connected in series. However, Lin Yu's present Tao fruit beads weren't petrified. A terrifying aura of death still lingered on them. However, under the chanting of the present Tao fruit, the aura of the beads gradually dimmed. Even the surrounding aura of death was still gathering. This was also the reason why Lin Yu had deduced that this was a dead end. However, there was a relatively safe path. It seemed to have been blasted open by someone. Lin Yu looked to the east. At the end of the horizon, there was a line of gray light that seemed to have existed since ancient times. That was the relatively safe place that Lin Yu had deduced. Is that the place that the first emperor opened up? Lin Yu muttered. Lin Yu had already seen that line of light when he set foot on the path here. However, he had always thought that it was just a ray of light that had always existed. What he didn't expect was that, under his deduction, it was actually broken by someone. Moreover, Lin Yu could see that light even from the top of the passageway. Now that they appeared at the bottom of the abyss, they could still see that there was still an endless amount of power above. Even though they were separated by endless time and space, they could still sense it. However, Lin Yu was not anxious. He still had not seen the apparitions of the Vairocana Buddha and the dark heavenly priest. He had been sitting here for 100 years. He sat across from the clay statue. Looking at the incoming soul lights, they continued to enter the cave. This continued until Lin Yu saw that some of the soul lights seemed to be holding some kind of paper in their hands. When it arrived in front of the clay sculpture, it was ignited by the soul light. Wisps of green smoke entered the clay sculpture's body. One of the 6 holes was opened, and the soul light naturally entered it. However, what made Lin Yu feel a sense of familiarity was that the paper these soul lights were holding seemed to be strange. It was a morning text. Just like the piece of paper that Gutsang used back then, it had some kind of similarity to its origin. However, there was no aura of darkness on it. Lin Yu sat here with his legs crossed for 100 years and experienced the arrival of soul lights several times. The number of soul lights that came here was more than 100 million. However, there were only a few people who held the paper. The wisps of green smoke entered the stone ball in the clay sculpture's hand, revealing more and more mystery. A supreme aura started to emit, just as the next living being holding the paper arrived. As the paper was ignited, Lin Yu took the initiative to guide this aura into the pearl on his present world Dao fruit wrist. He didn't know what this aura was used for. Perhaps he would be able to comprehend it after his realm was sufficient. However, Lin Yu could be sure that the green smoke from the burning paper definitely involved an extremely deep secret and had a huge effect. Lin Yu waited while absorbing the green smoke from the burning paper of the latecomers. There was dead silence here. Even the clay sculpture didn't know about this situation. However, 500 years had passed, and Lin Yu didn't wait for the Great Solar Buddha and the Great Solar Buddha, or other people that Lin Yu was familiar with. Perhaps the Vairocana Boundless Buddha Venerate and Luo Yunyang had already entered the cave before him and headed to an unknown place. Lin Yu stood up. Now that his present world Dao fruit had absorbed a lot of green smoke, it had become more and more mysterious, as if it no longer belonged to this ancient history and stood in an unknown territory. The pearl on his wrist was also surrounded by that aura, and the deathly aura had already settled down. The bead seemed to have turned into a supreme artifact. However, Lin Yu couldn't completely grasp it now. He could only affect a faint wisp of aura on it. The aura of that pearl enveloped the stone sword. In an instant, a path of survival was opened here. Under the deduction of Lin Yu's ancient characters, this was no longer a dead end. Now that he was here, Lin Yu didn't have any other thoughts. With his current realm, he couldn't understand the real secrets of this place. Perhaps one day in the future, he would come here again. He took a piece of paper that he had obtained from the hands of a soul light and placed it in his inner world. He knew that this piece of paper carried endless mysteries. Perhaps one day he would be able to use it, or perhaps in the future he would be able to comprehend its mysteries. Lin Yu stepped on the path to leave this place. The path was long and he didn't know the end. Lin Yu spent a total of 700 years just to pass through the path that the first emperor had blasted open. He looked at the terrifying spatial fluctuations in front of him. Lin Yu's spacetime Dao law enveloped his body as he stepped into the vast crack. It had been nearly 3,000 years since he left the 12 universes. Now, his son had been born. He was now a child, standing above the city of divine kings with his mother, the jade pure divine maiden, and looking up at the starry sky. "Mother, when will father come back?" The child had a worried look on his face. Since he was born, he hadn't seen what his father looked like. However, the child's talent was really amazing. When he was born, he triggered a vision of heaven and earth and almost emptied all the energy and matter in the city of divine kings. He was born in the Emperor realm. This was a terrifying talent. "It won't be long before he comes back," the jade pure divine maiden comforted. "At that time, when I become strong, father will no longer be alone. I will accompany him and fight against all the enemies in the world," the child said slowly with a resplendent fighting spirit. "Uncle Lin Zhanyu taught you again, right?" The jade pure divine maiden didn't blame him. Instead, she was gratified. "Uncle asked me to go to the 7th universe to play," the child said. In the realm sea, Lin Yu stepped across the crack. He appeared on a piece of land. There were no plants in the boundless expanse. All that could be seen were traces of battle. There was no lack of supreme aura among them. "Is this the land of origin?" Lin Yu looked at the surrounding environment and said slowly. After thousands of years, he finally arrived at the land of origin. The traces of Dao law here were very primitive. However, because of the great battle here, the Tao Law was in a half-destroyed state. Lin Yu looked at the ground under his feet and felt a suppression. Every speck of dust here was condensed from a world. It was incomparably terrifying. Is this the Emperor's aura? Lin Yu felt the aura left behind by the first Emperor here. The traces of battle here were still very new, as if the battle had happened less than tens of thousands of years ago. The old and new traces of battle intertwined. Chapter 1303. Lin Yu frowned. The ground here had been corroded by the strange aura. The aura of the stone sword in Lin Yu's hand repelled the strange aura. Then, he followed the traces of the first Emperor's aura and moved forward, crossing many collapsed mountain ranges. And at this moment, beneath the ground, a strange aura rose. Gradually, it condensed into indescribable living beings. They roared. Among them was a strange creature with dense fangs. It spoke a type of ancient language in a sinister manner, saying, "It's someone from that prison again. Damn it, kill him, it'll make up for the injuries on our bodies." They all looked at Lin Yu with malicious expressions. The strange tribe. Lin Yu looked at the 5 indescribable strange creatures and said calmly. His hands had been stained with the life of more than one of these strange living beings. No, his hands have the aura of our kind. Damn it, you killed our kind! The strange living being roared. Then, he gradually revealed shock and said, "It's the aura of a king." He killed a king. The few ghost doctors were incomparably shocked at this moment. However, they could clearly sense that Lin Yu's aura was not very strong. It was just in the original God realm. It was clear that the strange creature in the lead was more intelligent than the rest. At this moment, he slowly said, "I understand now. He came from the real cage. Back then, we had a few kings, and after the great battle, they were all slumbering in the cage. He must have killed them by coincidence." Killing intent could be seen in his eyes. Lin Yu did not give them a chance to talk nonsense. The stone sword in his hand was no longer suppressed here. The stone sword was still in a state of awakening. However, it was now infinitely close to a quasi-supreme weapon. Although these strange living beings were very strong and had almost reached the peak of the original God realm, they were still very weak. Under Lin Yu's stone sword and space Tao Law, they were all killed one by one. "You have far too many secrets," said the final bizarre being. Now, he was backing up in an attempt to flee. However, he gritted his teeth and rushed forward again. He wanted to kill Lin Yu completely. However, it was all in vain. Under Lin Yu's stone sword, the last strange being died. As expected, only a supreme weapon can cause real damage to them. Otherwise, they will always awaken. After Lin Yu killed the 5 strange beings and combined with his previous experience, he came to this conclusion. However, what surprised him was that the strange living beings here were the remnants of the first Emperor's people who had killed them. Even the strange living beings that were struggling at death's door had strength at least of the original God realm. In this land of origin, the strange being that they called King was probably already at the paramount realm. Then, the strange creature was killed. The eerie aura on the corpse began to dissipate, gradually revealing the true face of the eerie creature. Lin Yu frowned slightly. He looked at the strange living beings on the ground. Their true appearance was no different from the living beings in the universe. Are these all the living beings in the universe who have joined the darkness? Lin Yu thought of a possibility and muttered. He thought of the words of Tao Master Burial. Presumably, a large number of living beings had rebelled and joined the darkness. However, at the same time, Lin Yu received a message from the strange living beings. Why do these strange living beings call the 12 universes a cage? However, if he wanted to truly understand, Lin Yu needed to reach the gathering place of the pioneers as soon as possible to verify. As he moved forward, Lin Yu knew that he had fallen into a dangerous place. This place had been invaded by the strange beings. Because of the arrival of the first emperor, the powerful strange living beings here were killed. However, some of the remaining strange living beings were still difficult for Lin Yu to deal with. Among them, there were strange living beings that had surpassed the original god realm. Lin Yu fell into a bitter battle. If it weren't for the stone sword and the Divine King's Order's ability to reverse time and space, he might have already died on the way. Fortunately, the strange creatures that remained in this place were not in a very good state. They all seemed to be in a very weak state. They must have been injured by the first emperor and were still in the process of recovery. Lin Yu encountered many attacks. The Tao Law here was gradually appearing. After comprehending the Tao Law from Tao Master Burial in the Realm Sea and obtaining the fortune in the Stone City, Lin Yu's cultivation base naturally broke through to the late-stage primordial soul realm. The rhythm of the 12 universes. Walking in the desolate land of origin, Lin Yu was untainted by a speck of dust. He was like a banished immortal. Now, he was no longer afraid of the strange living beings that had surpassed the original god realm. The stone sword in his hand had already killed countless living beings. He had been trapped here for close to 1,000 years. In these 1,000 years, he had been killing all the way. Even the stone sword in his hand was emitting the radiance of a supreme weapon. The stone sword absorbed and refined the strange aura. Now, the gap on the sword was almost repaired. At this moment, a city appeared in front of him. It stood between heaven and earth. However, it seemed to be broken. There was a big hole on the city wall. It seemed to have been punched out by some living being. After Lin Yu killed the last strange creature, he came to the city wall. The city wall was still stained with the blood of the Supreme. There were corpses and bones everywhere. Among them, there was blood and flesh that surpassed the original god realm. They had been lit into torches. Some of them hadn't been extinguished yet. The light of the talisman symbols shone, forming a barrier against the strange aura to a certain extent. Lin Yu frowned slightly. He had already sensed the death of those predecessors who had blocked the strange living beings in the past. They stood in the land of origin with a solemn air. However, this place had already been breached. There were broken flags everywhere. We have lost. Who can protect the people behind us? There was a faintly discernible voice between heaven and earth. This was the obsession of the living beings who protected this city. No one knew how many years had passed. At this moment, it still existed and didn't dissipate. Lin Yu slowly entered the city. The fluttering flag was held by a skeleton, standing on the city wall. Even in death, he didn't let it go. There were corpses and bones everywhere. In the center of the city, there was a blood-stained shroud. The aura of the Supreme was emitting. A terrifying aura enveloped the entire city. Endless Tao laws were wailing on the shroud, as if they were paying tribute to the Supreme who had once stood at the extreme of the world. Lin Yu bowed slightly to the blood-stained shroud. These were all elites of the past. There was a supreme aura. Even though they had already passed away, they were still protecting this city. There was no strange aura here. However, this place had been breached in the end. The boundless will of eternity was revealed here. There was no longer any aura of living beings here. At the moment when the city was breached, one could see the corpses of the old, weak, women, and children on the city wall. They were wearing broken armor. Even in death, they didn't take a step back. Lin Yu used his dermic powers to bury them. In the city, tombs appeared one after another. However, they were all nameless. Just as Lin Yu was about to continue forward, the shroud suddenly shook. The thing that was stained with the blood of the Supreme appeared in Lin Yu's hand. It seemed that after Lin Yu erected the tombs for everyone, the obsession on the shroud had subsided. It knew that this place had been breached. Now, it had to follow Lin Yu to the current past to suppress the strange beings again. Chapter 1304. The shroud was no longer under Lin Yu's control and entered his inner world. Lin Yu looked at the broken city with a solemn heart. However, what he needed to do now was to enter the place where the predecessors lived as soon as possible. He walked out of the city. We've lost. Who can protect the people behind us? That stubbornness was still floating between heaven and earth. It was filled with despair, but more than that, it was unwillingness. After walking out of the city, there was still an endless expanse in front of him. Lin Yu didn't know how long this city had existed. He was still moving forward. There was no lack of eerie attack. He could still feel the aura left behind by the first emperor. It was extremely domineering. There were deep pits on the ground that looked like fingerprints. The aura of a supreme being was emitted from them. The eerie aura had evaporated. This was the scene left behind by the first emperor when he killed the eerie creatures. In the land of origin, even a grain of sand was a world. Yet, a casual strike from the first emperor was able to leave behind such a terrifying scene in the origin grounds. It was absolutely terrifying. At this moment, with his late original God Realm cultivation base, Lin Yu didn't dare to say that he could destroy a big mountain. It took hundreds of years. Lin Yu frowned slightly. He saw endless darkness in front of him. The whole world was covered by dark clouds. There seemed to be an unimaginable battle happening in front of him. He could see an ancestral dragon roaring in the dark clouds in the sky, shattering the darkness. The indomitable ancestral dragon's true body couldn't be seen with a single glance. It was incomparably huge, probably comparable to the laughter of the universe. At this moment it was rolling in the dark clouds. First Emperor. Lin Yu was sure that the first emperor was fighting against the eerie creatures. Lin Yu was very familiar with the ancestral dragon's aura. He had seen it on Earth. At this moment, the eerie creatures were all gathering in front of him. However, Lin Yu couldn't sense anything other than the first emperor and the ancestral dragon's aura. One could only see that even an existence as powerful as the ancestral dragon was injured. The scales on its body were torn apart, revealing a strange black aura. Lin Yu had a bad premonition. The first emperor had fought his way here from afar, fighting against the endless bizarreness alone. Now, facing the endless darkness, he might not be able to hold on. Lin Yu was moving forward. The shroud seemed to have sensed something and was brought out by Lin Yu. Heaven and earth changed color. A supreme aura was being emitted. The eerie creatures that were approaching were all intimidated by this aura. The shroud was draped over Lin Yu's body. It wrapped around him, and a supreme aura was revealed. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have turned into a different person. Even the aura on his body had changed. A power that was close to being an utmost being emanated from his body. The stone sword appeared in his hand. Right now, under the augmentation of the shroud, he possessed a power that was close to being an utmost being. However, Lin Yu knew that his strength was limited. It would be difficult for him to maintain this power for a long time. He would have to pay a huge price. Taking a step forward, he appeared in the sky. He slashed out with his sword. The strange creatures that were approaching from below instantly vanished into thin air, turning into dust. They had been completely obliterated. However, under the black clouds, a large number of eerie creatures appeared. There was no end to them, and it seemed like they could not be killed. Under the augmentation of the shroud, Lin Yu's face became blurry. He was shrouded in a bloody aura. He appeared beside a man in a black and gold dragon robe who was in a fierce battle. The man's figure was mighty and tall. His gaze was piercingly cold. As long as he stood there, he would bring about an endless majesty. Below him, there were countless bronze mercenaries. They had terrifying combat strength as they fought against the eerie creatures. This man was truly the only one in the world. He was the one who suppressed all the reincarnators in the reincarnation era. He was the first emperor. At this moment, He was facing off against 4 bizarre beings with quasi-supreme battle prowess alone. He was also a quasi-king among the eerie creatures. Right now, the first emperor's strength had not fully recovered. Now that he was facing 4 quasi-kings of the same level, he was gradually losing. Lin Yu activated the stone sword in his hand and separated the battlefield. The first emperor looked at Lin Yu, whose face was covered by the mist. His eyes were still indifferent. A latecomer? The first emperor said slowly. He did not sense any eerie aura from Lin Yu. In his memory, there was no influence on Lin Yu's aura. However, when he saw the shroud on Lin Yu's body, he instantly understood. Lin Yu nodded his head. Compared to the first emperor, he was indeed a latecomer. Let me give you a hand. Lin Yu looked at the 4 quasi-kings around him, without any change in his expression. The 4 quasi-kings had already condensed into their human forms, but their faces were pale. Only now did Lin Yu know that when the eerie creatures reached their level, they would condense into their human forms and become existences that were no different from other living beings. However, the eerie aura on their bodies could devour and pollute everything. Even the laws of the Tao would be polluted by their appearance. They were no longer suitable for living beings to comprehend and would be assimilated. It's the aura of the shroud. To think that it has already been obtained by someone. The 4 quasi-kings did not show any signs of panic in the face of Lin Yu's arrival. The one from back then has already died in the hands of our king. Now that there's only the shroud left, what can he do? Another quasi-king spoke again. He knew the anecdotes of that era. The utmost being is not to be humiliated, Lin Yu said slowly. He locked onto the quasi-king who spoke. Without wasting any more words, he held the stone sword in his hand and attacked the quasi-monarch realm expert. Back then, the utmost being was undoubtedly in despair. He was the only one in that city. That utmost being was quite bold. To think that he dared to kill his way into our ancestral grounds alone. Another quasi-king spoke. This was the secret history of that era. However, the strange creatures were never willing to talk about it. However, the white-haired quasi-king who was clad in armor was clearly a battle maniac. He respected the strong. In the process of the battle, Lin Yu saw that there seemed to be a city not far away from them. On the city walls, there were living beings watching the battle. Lin Yu did not know why they had not come to help the first emperor yet. Instead, they were just watching from the sidelines. However, Lin Yu did not pay too much attention to it. The first emperor nodded at Lin Yu. He was holding back 3 quasi-kings by himself. Now that Lin Yu had joined in, he was obviously much more relaxed. However, there were not only 4 quasi-kings here. There were 5 of them. At this moment, the ancestral dragon was dealing with one of them. Lin Yu understood the first emperor's intentions. He wanted to hold everyone back so that Lin Yu would have a chance to kill one of them. This was a bold move. His cultivation base had not fully recovered. Right now, he was only a half-step utmost being. However, facing 3 quasi-kings of the same cultivation base, he was still calm and composed. He was born with an aura that made his enemies tremble. Chapter 1305. Another aura has appeared. There was an old lady on top of the city walls. Holding onto a walking stick, she spoke slowly. Her turbid eyes glowed brightly. These people are obviously from our camp. Wang Tianjun, why aren't you going out to help? At this moment, there was a young man beside him with a strong aura. He frowned and asked, "Are you questioning the Heavenly Lord?" The young man beside Wang Tianjun questioned sternly. "Linger, don't be anxious," Wang Tianjun said slowly. He looked at the battlefield and said, "After fighting with the strange creatures for so many years, don't you know what they are capable of? Maybe it's just a show they're putting on to make us open the restriction." The man did not say anything else. He just frowned and looked at the 2 people who were fighting outside the city. At this moment, Lin Yu was facing a quasi-king clad in black armor. The black armor on his body was strange, and could make him immune to all mystiques and spells. However, Lin Yu was now supported by the power of the shroud and had reached the quasi-supreme realm. His combat strength was terrifying. Although he did not have the supreme laws of the quasi-supreme realm, Lin Yu still suppressed the quasi-king with the stone sword in his hand. You're just a living creature in a cage. Now that you've rebelled, you should be punished. Although the quasi-king was suppressed, he was still very calm. He did not use all his strength. Lin Yu listened to the quasi-king's words. This was not the first time he had heard it, but his Tao heart was not shaken at all. He knew that if this continued, he would definitely be defeated. He used the power of the King of Gods' order. The time and space Daos appeared at the same time. In almost an instant, he temporarily restrained the quasi-king's body. The stone sword in his hand burst out with a terrifying light. It's that kind of Daos. After reaching the quasi-king realm, the strange creatures were truly immortal and indestructible. There was no gap in the era. After seeing Lin Yu's method, his expression changed for the first time. Back then, Lin Yu's first ancestor had given the strange substance an indelible memory. Now that he had seen Lin Yu unleash that kind of Tao law and the aura of that person, he couldn't help but be shocked. Now, he couldn't care about anything else and used his strongest move. A crimson battle spear appeared in his hand. The battle spear was made of bronze, and the reason it was red in color was because it was stained with the blood of creatures, not scattering for a long time. Even in the future, it still existed. Within it, Lin Yu could sense that there was more than just the blood of an utmost being from the cosmos back in the day. Do you feel it? The blood on it might belong to your ancestor. The ancestor of this quasi-king was once a supreme being, a true king. In the past, in the process of conquering the universe, the number of living beings of the universe that had died under his spear numbered in the trillions. Even the utmost beings had died in his hands. This spear was a great killing weapon. It possessed terrifying power. Just the aura that leaked out was enough to destroy a large number of Tao laws. More than half of the bronze servants below were directly shattered. Although the material of this spear wasn't high, after being stained with the blood of an utmost being, it was much more terrifying than an ordinary quasi-supreme weapon. The moment this spear appeared, the shroud on Lin Yu's body trembled visibly. He could also sense the aura of his old friend who had fought alongside him all those years ago. At this moment, the power it gave Lin Yu was even more terrifying. The light in Lin Yu's eyes was even brighter than the sun, the moon, and the stars. Under Lin Yu's terrifying aura, heaven and earth were constantly exploding. The space-time Tao law was constantly evolving, and this place was being reformed and reborn. Lin Yu didn't say a word. Instead, he directly charged towards the quasi-king. The stone sword and the spear clashed. Terrifying Tao laws were surging. Even the immortal seals on the city were shaking. The old woman known as Wang Tianjun struck the ground with her walking stick to maintain the restriction. The terrifying battle affected a large area of the origin grounds, forming large craters everywhere. Lin Yu couldn't care about anything else now. If Bai Xiaoli hadn't sternly warned him that the clay jar couldn't be exposed in the origin grounds, perhaps Lin Yu would have already smashed the clay jar out by now. However, with the support of the God King's order, Lin Yu was now suppressing the Quasi-King. I can't let you live. The Quasi-King was already shocked. He was already showing signs of weakness. Even with the spear of his ancestor, he still couldn't defeat Lin Yu. Although he knew that Lin Yu's true cultivation level might not be high, the comprehension of Tao that he was displaying now was unfathomable. If he was allowed to grow, he thought of Lin Yu's ancestor, who had exerted a huge pressure on the strange race back then. He wanted to strangle Lin Yu in the cradle. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to use all his strength. In the end, he even used a forbidden technique. Everything here was reduced to nothingness under the power of the Quasi-King. He could bury everything. This seemed to involve a secret technique of spacetime. However, for Lin Yu, who had mastered the laws of spacetime and the God King's order, this was nothing. World's end near at hand. Lin Yu escaped from the area of destruction. The moment he disappeared, he was already behind the Quasi-King. This ability wasn't used on the Quasi-King, but to increase his own speed. Therefore, it didn't lose its effect. Puff! The sword pierced through the Quasi-King's chest. The power of the God King's order appeared and imprisoned the Quasi-King. At this moment, Lin Yu wanted to completely refine the Quasi-King. "It's not like I haven't killed the king of the strange race," Lin Yu said indifferently. The Quasi-King's eyes were filled with disbelief. At this moment, at such a close distance, he finally sensed the aura of his clan's king from Lin Yu's body, which was covered by the shroud. He knew that Lin Yu wasn't lying. He had indeed killed the king of the strange race. "This is impossible." He forcefully broke free from the bindings of the God King's order. He wanted to replenish his energy from the boundless black fog. A few ancient words floated in the air. These were the ancient words controlled by the first emperor. They imprisoned the space of the origin ground. In the process of fighting the three Quasi-Kings, he still had some energy left to isolate the black fog. He knew the characteristics of the strange race. As long as the black fog didn't disappear, they couldn't truly die. He watched as the Quasi-King broke free. Lin Yu attacked again. The space-time superposition of the God King's order appeared. Now, the connection with the black cloud was blocked by the first emperor. Lin Yu wanted to use his strongest attack to completely kill the Quasi-King. The people on the city walls could also see this scene clearly. They were incomparably shocked. A little fatty was even more emotional. "I can see the king of the strange race pass away." He wasn't the only one. Some of the youths in the city were also excited. They had been here for so many years and had been passively resisting. Now, they could actually see the two of them killing the Quasi-King. "Don't worry, fight," the first emperor said, full of majesty. He restrained the three Quasi-Kings who wanted to help and created an opportunity for Lin Yu. The ancestral dragon above also sensed the battle below. Although it wasn't as strong as the Quasi-King, it used all its power to stop the Quasi-Kings above. Boom! The space trembled as endless power spread. Under the power of the God King's order's space-time superposition, the five Quasi-Kings felt a strong threat. "It's that kind of Tao art." At this moment, a Quasi-King with high aptitude who had lived for countless years was shocked. He recognized the space-time superposition that Lin Yu was talking about. "It's the art of the first God King of the 12 universes." He was shocked. However, Lin Yu had already condensed his attack. Chapter 1306. The entire space was shaking. Heaven and earth were torn apart. The stone sword in Lin Yu's hand didn't change at all after absorbing the boundless energy. However, everyone knew how terrifying the stone sword was. None of the Quasi-Kings present could withstand this attack. Unfortunately, the Quasi-King's connection with the black mist above had been cut off by the first emperor's ancient word. The Quasi-King had yet to fully recover. The Quasi-King's expression changed. The ancient spear in his hand vibrated as he prepared for the final attack. Boom! The sword light descended with a loud boom. It was impossible for him to dodge. At the same time, Lin Yu used the power of the ancient characters to suppress the Quasi-Monarch. He actually mastered 4 ancient words. The Quasi-Kings were shocked. However, they were more worried about the Quasi-King's current situation. After Lin Yu condensed this technique, even with the support of the shroud, it still showed signs of dissipation. The spacetime reset in the King of Gods badge, allowing Lin Yu's body to reform. The Quasi-Saint had completely died, his body turning into dust. Everyone was shocked. Lin Yu looked ahead calmly. He was calm. This was the first time he faced an expert of the bizarre creatures head-on. However, he didn't panic at all. The quasi-kings broke away from the first emperor and the ancestral dragon. At this moment they used some kind of strange spell together. After chanting some words, a piece of paper appeared in their hands. He had actually managed to reconstruct the body of the quasi-martial monarch that had already disappeared. Now, it gathered on the paper. They didn't know how many tricks Lin Yu and the first emperor had up their sleeves. After such a long time, the king of the bizarre creatures had yet to awaken. They needed to conserve their strength. Retreat, a quasi-king said. The black clouds were retreating. Lin Yu and the first emperor didn't continue their pursuit. The battle this time had consumed too much of their energy. The shroud disappeared and returned to Lin Yu's inner world. The ancestral dragon was covered in wounds and his aura was weak. He crawled on the ground and gradually returned to the first emperor's dragon robe, turning into an imprint. After this battle, ancestral Gragon was severely injured and needed a long period of time to recuperate. He had no idea how long it would take for the bizarre tribe to attack again. Lin Yu's current cultivation was insufficient. Using the power of the God King's token, he could only heal a portion of ancestral Gragon's injuries. Now that you have been exposed, you might be targeted in the future, the first emperor said slowly. They arrived at the foot of the city wall. The city walls were tall, and there were traces of swords, sabers, and axes on them. They emitted a simple and ancient aura. It had existed for an extremely long time. These strange quasi-kings had originally led an army to attack the ancient city. However, the first emperor arrived and stopped them outside. Quickly open the city gates for the two of you, the little fatty hurriedly said. Today's scene was too shocking for them. Everyone felt a sense of solemnity towards the first emperor and Lin Yu. The two of them arrived at the city gate. But he didn't open the door for a long time. This was Wang Tianjuan's intention. Tianjun, why aren't you opening the gates for them? The little fatty Bao Jianming did not understand. With a questioning tone, he said, they are the ones who stopped the army of the bizarre tribe. Bao Jianming was so tall that it was frightening. Facing Bao Jianming's questioning tone, Jin Tianjun merely swept a glance at him. Their identities are unknown. Let's observe them for a while longer, Jin Tianjun said. She was not flustered. Lin Yu and the little fatty stood below the city, their faces cold. They did not know what the people in the city were up to. The two of you below, state your names. Wang Tianjuan's subordinate transmitted his voice. The first emperor's face was calm. He let out an aura that affected something in the depths of the ancient city. Boom! The entire city shook. Something left behind by the utmost being of the past. Everyone was intimidated by this aura. A golden decree appeared in the void. How dare you? Let the reincarnators in. A divine thought crushed the hearts of everyone present. Old ancestor Gu. Their faces changed. To think that the old ancestor of the ancient city, whose seniority was frighteningly high, would be startled by a single decree and speak up. Hurry and let the senior in. Jin Tianjuan's face was a little embarrassed right now. She was also a powerful being who was about to break through to the quasi-utmost being state, and was in charge of managing the ancient city. To think that she would be reprimanded right now. Senior, please forgive us. However, the background of the person beside you is unknown. Please inform us. Otherwise, this ancient city. I hope you can understand. The old man who was with Wang Tianjun said apologetically. He did not wish for Lin Yu to enter. Everyone had witnessed the performance of Lin Yu and the first emperor. In fact, they had even killed a quasi-king personally. It was fine if the people within the ancient city did not come out to help out, fearing that they might fall into a trap. But now, the battle was over. I don't mind breaking the seals of this place, the first emperor said indifferently. His tone was filled with an endless amount of authority. This was not a joke. Although the first emperor had yet to recover his full cultivation, he was extremely familiar with this place. He had also contributed to the construction of this city. "Senior, you're making things difficult for us." The old man's face turned ugly. He had his own selfish motives. He knew that Lin Yu's cultivation realm was not very high, but he had many godly items in his possession. The old man and Wang Tianjuan's plan was to suppress him before entering the city and force him to hand over those items. "I am the descendant of the first deity king of the 12 universes, Lin Yu." Lin Yu had been in a high position for many years. How could he not see the old man and Wang Tianjuan's motive? His attitude was very cold right now. The time and space dais appeared. At the same time, the deity king's badge appeared in his hand. This was the first time the deity king's badge was revealed to the world. Ancient runes intertwined on it. A mysterious power was released, causing the seals here to show signs of instability, as if they could be broken at any time. The eyes of Wang Tianjun and the old man changed slightly. They were starting to covet the deity king's badge. But at this moment, the city quaked. Who dares to stand in the way of the descendant of Lin Zhigao? A terrifying roar caused even Wang Tianjuan's face to change slightly. An old man dressed in broken armor appeared. His face was filled with scars that were filled with a savage aura. Even now, there was still a strange aura on him that had not disappeared completely. Linli, one of the 300 old soldiers by the side of the first deity king of the 12 universes. "I thought that you had already perished in the secret ground," Wang Tianjun said slowly. His cultivation realm was similar to Wang Tianjuan's, but the battle intent on his body caused everyone to shiver, as though they were in an ice cellar. "Do you want to fight?" Linli questioned Wang Tianjun. The broken sword in his hand was pointed diagonally. Linli was about to strike at the slightest disagreement. Looking at Linli who had appeared, everyone was in disbelief. The old soldiers by the side of the utmost being back then were almost at the half-step utmost being level. It was hard to imagine how strong Lin Xian would have been back then if he had not passed away. "There's no need to get angry. Since you're of the bloodline of that person and once fought against the strange heroes, you can naturally enter." Lin Xian's name was a taboo in the origin ground. This was also the reason why everyone was shocked when Lin Yu mentioned the name of his first ancestor. But as for the specifics, no one knew. The city gates opened. Wang Tianjuan's wrinkled face could not help but tremble. This time around she was really embarrassed. Chapter 1307. Lin Yu and the founding emperor entered the ancient city. Everyone's gazes were focused on the two of them. That person's aura isn't that powerful, but that battle power he displayed just now was truly terrifying. Someone said slowly. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. "He doesn't seem to be that old. He is about the same age as us." Someone with a terrifying divine ability was able to see through all illusions and learn of Lin Yu's true age. After the founding emperor entered the ancient city, he went directly to the secret area. The aura and might of the founding emperor made it so that not a single person dared to step forward. Linli waited at the city gates for Lin Yu. "Thank you, senior." Lin Yu clasped his hands. This was a show of friendship. Linli ignored the refusal of the current ruler of the ancient city and was willing to engage in battle to bring Lin Yu in. "Now that you have arrived at the ancient city, follow me." Linli sheathed his war sword. He placed it on his back. The old man gritted his teeth. Now that someone knew of Linli's existence, most likely no one would dare to do anything to Lin Yu, save for those old fogies who had been slumbering in the secret area. In addition, he had established a relationship with the founding emperor. Most likely, there was no one in the ancient city who could threaten him. Lin Yu followed Linli to a residence. This place was located in the center of the ancient city, but because no one had lived here for a long time, it was covered in dust. The tiles on the roof were all shattered, and as the door opened, they fell to the ground. There was a small courtyard. It was filled with a sense of dilapidation, and the furnishings were very simple as well. This was Linley's residence. But after that battle, he had suffered extremely heavy injuries and had been in a deep slumber ever since. Cough, cough. After entering the courtyard, Linley coughed lightly, wiping away the little bit of black blood at the corner of his mouth. "Senior, what is it?" Lin Yu asked, concerned. This person was an old soldier who had been by his first ancestor's side. As far as Lin Yu knew, he was the oldest person in the 12 universes. "I'm fine." Linley wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. But Lin Yu knew that Linley's condition wasn't good. Without suppressing the state of his body was already emitting an aura of decay. He was almost half a foot into the ground. His true spirit seemed to have been damaged beyond repair. However, Lin Yu still wanted to give it a try. He sacrificed the power of the God King's order. He wanted to reverse time and space to heal the old soldier's injuries, although Lin Yu knew that such a Buddhist style was not of much use. This was because the old soldiers were all seriously injured in the battle before the ancient history. They were all injured by strange things. It was all because of Lin Xian that he was able to survive. Now, his true spirit was on the verge of completely dissipating due to the passage of time. "I am someone who should have died to begin with. There's no need to waste the power of the God King's insignia," Linley said. He extended his withered hand and stopped Lin Yu from continuing to activate the God King's token. Linley was currently at the peak of the Tao guiding level. Even though his body was damaged, Lin Yu still felt as though his body was as deep as the sea. He looked at Lin Yu, his eyes filled with tears. He said slowly, "Although I can no longer remember what the boss looked like, I can sense a sense of familiarity from your face. You are of God King Lin's bloodline. You must be very similar." On the battlefield, Linley had never frowned, even when he had suffered life-threatening injuries. Now that he saw Lin Yu, his eyes couldn't help but be filled with hot tears. In the past, Lin Xian had been simply too powerful. He had forcibly severed the river of time. This was why no one in the future remembered what he looked like or even what he was like. Only in the Genesis lands, through word of mouth, would one learn about him. This was one of the main reasons why the 12 universes had become weaker in the future. This was because some of the secrets that Lin Xian had left behind, when he severed the river of time, had touched upon a taboo and ceased to exist. Even the old soldiers by his side, the most powerful experts of the 12 universes, had all perished. Now the only one left was Linley. "Everyone has perished. God King Lin, why did you leave me behind? Why did you do that?" Linley cried out. In the past, he had experienced an unimaginable war. Beneath the overlords, everyone was nothing more than ants. Everyone had perished, and even the realm sea had been broken through. Not a single person had survived. Only Linley had been saved by Lin Xian, who had then been placed within the ancient city, falling into an endless slumber. In the present world, he had sensed a familiar aura. Only then had he forced himself to take a deep breath and come to the ancient city. Lin Yu didn't go forward to console him. He knew the sorrow in Linley's heart. He had personally seen everyone by his side perish in battle. Even Lin Xian, whom he had thought to be invincible, had perished in the end. Not even a corpse was left behind. He was the only one left in the world. This was a type of pain. A long time later, only then did Linley come back to his senses. However, his aura was growing weaker and weaker. It seemed as though he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. This ancient city has already lost its original spirit. The living creatures of this ancient city, because they have been holed up for too long, have lost their bloodlust. Some of them are constantly fighting amongst themselves. Linley began to explain to Lin Yu the current state of affairs of the ancient city. Lin Yu had already sensed this when he had arrived. He now somewhat understood why there had been such bizarre invasions in the universe. Although this was an ancient city that resisted the bizarre invasions, they didn't fight head-on. Instead, they relied on the restrictive spells to hide within. It was unavoidable that some of them would slip through the net and make their way around this place, entering the universe. Perhaps you have already seen it. Up ahead, there is a ruined city that has already been conquered. Linley and Bibi entered the room. Linley swiped his hand through the air, isolating this place from the outside world, making it hard for others to listen in. Lin Yu nodded. That was where the utmost being's shroud was located. Actually, back then, in the Genesis lands, there were a total of 9 of these ancient cities called Imperial Passes. However, after the prehistoric battles, they were gradually conquered. Right now, only this final one remains, as well as a new one that was rebuilt in the future. Linley let out a sigh. Back then, the utmost beings had already perished in battle. Within the 12 universes, there were no longer any utmost beings who could resist the bizarre invasions. Even in the future, there were experts who had broken through to the utmost being level. However, in the end, they were all alone, unable to hold on. Their fates were the same as the utmost being's shroud. In the end, their fates were death. From Linley's explanation, Lin Yu gradually began to understand how tragic the battles of the Genesis lands had been in the various eras. Actually, the utmost beings of the 12 universes have all entered the Genesis lands, only. Linley didn't continue. However, Lin Yu had guessed as much. Back then, under the leadership of Lin Xian, the 12 universes must have been extremely prosperous. However, after the eruption of the Black Calamity, Lin Xian had taken away all of the experts, and in the end, they had all perished within the Genesis lands. In the end, it was another utmost being of the 12 universes who used some major methods to send the last remaining bloodline of God King Lin back to the 12 universes. Linley recounted everything that had happened back then. Lin Yu listened from the side. This was the reason why the 12 universes had grown weaker. Lin Xian's youngest son, who had been sent back by another utmost being, hadn't grown up at all. He had been suppressed by many sides. Within the other universes, there were still experts who hadn't taken part in the battle. In addition, because Lin Xian had forcefully severed the river of time and prevented the unimaginable bizarreness, he had borrowed the will of others to revive himself. This had touched upon a taboo, and thus, even his bloodline had been affected. It was not tolerated by the great Tao of heaven and earth. All of these events had caused grief to the 12 universes. Right now, there are some people within the ancient city who have designs on you, both in the open and in the dark. You have to grow up quickly. Linley said, I've used a forbidden technique to suppress my body. I still have 1,000 years to protect you. If Linley was willing to pay any price, his power would definitely not be limited to the peak of the Tao realm. After all, he had followed Lin Xian for many years, and was one of the top existences amongst the utmost beings. Naturally, his cultivation base wouldn't be too low. Chapter 1308. Lin Yu bowed towards Linley. They chatted for a long time. Linley asked about the current situation in the 12 universes. Elder Lin, you can return to the 12 universes to take a look while you are still alive, Lin Yu said. But Linley shook his head. I am a failure. I don't have the face to return to the 12 universes. I feel guilty when I look at that continent. Linley's heart was filled with boundless frustration. He continued, I am a veteran of an expedition. I have always disregarded life and death. Wherever I die, I will be buried. All the mountains in the world are the same. Lin Yu didn't insist. Until the next morning, Linley was like an old man past his prime. His eyes were cloudy, and he was dressed in a gray robe. However, he didn't take off his armor, continuing to wear it on his body. His saber never left his body, and his sword never left his hand. He began to take care of his little courtyard. At this time, someone came to pay a visit. "Senior Lin, I've come to find Lin Yu." The little fatty Bao Jiaming arrived. He chortled merrily. His appearance was very handsome, and he looked completely harmless. Unconsciously, he could cause others to have a good impression of him. Inside, Linley pointed towards the room. After experiencing this great battle, Lin Yu had gained many insights, and he was currently meditating. Bao Jiaming didn't enter to disturb him. He just stood there in the courtyard, waiting for Lin Yu while helping Linley water the plant. Linley knew that Bao Jiaming's background was extraordinary. He didn't feel any enmity, and so Linley naturally didn't feel any wariness. Only in the afternoon did Lin Yu open the door. Dressed in white, he entered the courtyard. Fellow Taoist Lin truly is a dragon amongst men. Bao Jiaming, seeing Lin Yu's appearance, couldn't help but praise him. Lin Yu looked at Bao Jiaming. Bao Jiaming still had some influence on that man atop the city walls. Back then, Bao Jiaming had spoken up for him. Thus, Lin Yu still had a good impression of him. "I am Bao Jiaming. I admire you, fellow Taoist Lin, and want to make friends," Bao Jiaming said warmly. "Fellow Taoist Bao." Lin Yu cupped his hands towards Bao Jiaming. The reason why Lin Yu grasped the ancient characters was because he could see through falsehoods. At this moment, Bao Jiaming was at the late original God realm. His innate talent was really amazing. He must have had an unimaginable fortune on him. "May I know why fellow Taoist Bao is looking for me?" Lin Yu asked. "It's nothing particularly important." Bao Jiaming scratched his head and said, "It's just that the people of our generation are preparing to hold a banquet. When the time comes, we would like to invite fellow Taoist Lin." Bao Jiaming issued an invitation. Lin Yu had only just arrived. Although he had already learned a lot from Linley, however, he didn't know much about the last ancient city. For example, he didn't know much about the experts of this generation. "Fellow Taoist Lin, it's just an ordinary gathering. You don't have to worry too much in order to soothe your mood in this oppressive environment," Bao Jiaming said with a smile. "No problem." "When?" Lin Yu asked. He could use this opportunity to understand what level he was at in this generation. Lin Yu had already learned that the 12 universes had always been viewed as a prison by the strange creatures and the creatures of the Genesis lands. The edicts within them were incomplete, and the energy and matter were sparse. He had trained for many years in the 12 universes. He didn't know that he was already lagging behind the people of his generation in this ancient city. Then it's settled. Bao Jiaming laughed, then took out an invitation card. It had a golden seal on it, and at the same time, it contained the power of some sort of edicts. It looked very mystical. The people in these ancient cities were not simple people. If one were to trace their origins back, it would be hard to imagine. Bao Jiaming said a few simple words, then turned and left. Lin Yu was currently within the courtyard. Holding a gourd ladle, he began to water the plants Linley had just planted. "There might be people who will make things difficult for you at this gathering," Linley said. He knew very well the nature of some of the people of this ancient city. After so many years, they had already fallen. They had forgotten the purpose of guarding this place. Lin Yu nodded. "The people of the 12 universes will never be weaker than others. If anyone makes things difficult for you, you can kill them," Linley said calmly. "I don't care about the battles between people of the same generation. But if those old freaks shamelessly attack you, I don't mind wiping out their lineage." Although Linley's words were calm, they were incomparably domineering. The first God King of the 12 universes had been like this as well. As a former God King's subordinate, he naturally wouldn't lose his reputation. This was the bearing that had been passed down through the 12 universes. "I am the God King of the 12 universes." Lin Yu nodded. His words were also calm. At least for now, Lin Yu knew that Wang Tianjuan's lineage had ill intentions towards him. This was because in the previous battle, in order to kill a quasi-king, he had exposed too many things. He couldn't help but arouse their greed. However, in Lin Li's eyes, these people were nothing more than clowns. As time went on in the Genesis lands, there was no clear distinction between day and night. It was always dusky. Only a ray of light could be seen on the horizon, disappearing or appearing. This was the basis for the change of day and night. Lin Yu followed the location Bao Jiaming had left behind and arrived at a spacious area within the ancient city. The ancient city was very large, no smaller than a world. There were many areas without buildings. There were also areas that had been damaged in the battle. Tables and chairs had already been set up here. The terrain was very spacious, and hundreds of people had already gathered here. They were the most talented people of this era in the ancient city. They were also the cornerstones of the future ancient city's resistance against the anomalies. Bao Jiaming was outside the banquet, waiting for Lin Yu's arrival. Fellow Taoist Bao, long time no see. Lin Yu arrived in front of Bao Jiaming. At this time, there was a young man with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, as well as a woman with bright eyes and white teeth. She had a head of silver hair and large watery eyes. She looked very cute. This is Fu Linyun, and this is Bai Lu. They are my best friends in the ancient city, Bao Jiaming introduced. The young man with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes had also spoken for Lin Yu in the ancient city. He wanted Wang Tianjun to send people to support Lin Yu and the first emperor. Greetings, fellow Taoist Fu, fellow Taoist Bai. Lin Yu cupped his hands. The two of them also responded warmly. The banquet is about to begin. Let's go in first, Bao Jiaming said. The few of them walked into the banquet. They followed the seats and came to the front few seat. Obviously, Bao Jiaming's status was not low among these people. He was at the top. This had to do with his background and strength. The first seat on the left is the most talented person in Wang Tianjuan's lineage. His name is Wang Chuan. The first seat on the right is a man who looks like a banished immortal. His face cannot be seen clearly. His name is Tian Yi. Bao Jiaming introduced to Lin Yu. Tian Yi's strength is unfathomable. His residence is a supreme disciple who has been sealed in this world. Bao Jiaming did not hold back and introduced to Lin Yu. However, he did not speak loudly. Obviously, he was also afraid of Tian Yi in his heart. As for Wang Chuan, he was wearing a golden battle armor. His eyes were frightening and carried an invincible aura. At this time, he was already at the peak of the late original God realm. After reaching the original God realm, each small stage was as different as the sky and the earth. There were very few people who could fight above their level. There was no doubt that they had all condensed 9 layers of their inner world. It was rare to see such people in the 12 universes. Just in this ancient city there were no less than 5 of them. Chapter 1309. After they took their seats, before the banquet started, one of the retainers behind Wang Chuan looked in Lin Yu's direction and said, "I'm afraid that this seat is not for a single person." His words were filled with sarcasm. He didn't look at Lin Yu, but he said it to him. "Wang Chuan, control your lackey. Don't bark," Bao Jiaming said directly. He was very straightforward and said directly to Wang Chuan. This caused the face of the retainer behind him to turn green and white. His cultivation and talent weren't low. He was already in the middle stage of the original God realm and had condensed 8 layers of his inner world. He looked at Bao Jiaming and said gloomily, "You, what? You want to fight?" Bao Jiaming didn't give him any face. At this time, some people had already looked over. They knew that Bao Jiaming didn't give the Wang family any face when they were in the ancient city. He directly questioned the old heavenly lord of their family. He had already formed a grudge. It was very likely that it would explode in this banquet. If you want, I don't mind. Wang Chuan was calm and had the demeanor of a strong expert. Bao Jianming, don't think that you can be domineering just because of your birth. The ancient city is terrifying. Do you think you can dominate it alone? The retinue behind Wang Chuan said directly. Now that he had Wang Chuan's support, he wasn't afraid anymore. Bao Jianming hated it when people talked about his birth the most. You should be taught a lesson in front of your retinue. Bao Jianming bent his fingers and a white light appeared in his hand. Lin Yu looked at the white light and felt familiar. It seemed to be the great dream sky art that the ancient god of the 8th universe had used. However, the one Bao Jianming used was obviously stronger and more profound. The void shook. With regards to Bao Jianming's direct attack, no one had expected it. The retinue's expression changed. He knew that Bao Jianming had condensed 9 layers of his inner world and had a supreme cultivation method. Even in the ancient city, he was in the top echelon. He was absolutely invincible. Wang Chuan made his move. Golden light crisscrossed and offset the clear light. The two of you, this is a banquet. It's supposed to be a discussion of the Tao. There's no need to fight. A graceful woman dressed in a scarlet flowing dress stepped forward. She arrived in front of them. However, his intention was very clear. He was deliberately targeting Bao Jianming. As for the provocation from Wang Chuan's retainer, he didn't mention a single word. Jiang Zhanyan, do you want to get involved too? Bao Jianming asked directly. He was never a person who would swallow his anger, nor was he a fool. He was not the least bit afraid of being deliberately targeted. Fellow Taoist Bao, you've misunderstood me. I'm just here to persuade you. It's not good for everyone to start a fight at the banquet, and it'll ruin the elegance of the banquet. Jiang Zhanyan pretended to be calm. With these words, Bao Jianming was pushed to the point where everyone was criticizing him. Bao Jianming stood up. He looked at Wang Chuan and said, "If you are courageous, let's go to the duel arena. The bet is your lackey's life." Bao Jianming refused to give up. "Do you think I'll lower myself to your level?" Wang Chuan calmly picked up his tea and said slowly. "Sure enough, you're with the person in the cage. You're all short-sighted people. You're not afraid of polluting your body," the retainer continued. His words were not only belittling Bao Jianming, but also obviously despising Lin Yu. "Is the person next to Bao Jianming the lowly person from the universe in yesterday's rumor? You can't say that. It's said that he's the divine king of a universe." Some people in the audience were whispering, but most of their words were full of mockery. "Do you think you've forgotten your homeland because you're living in the land of origin? You're really superior," Bao Jianming said sarcastically. The ancestors of these people were all experts who fought against the strange things, but now they had forgotten where they came from. They regarded the 12 universes as a desolate and lowly place. Bao Jianming's words made some people's faces turn livid. This was a fact that they had always refused to admit. But now that Bao Jianming had brought it up, some people could not help but get angry and refuted. The 12 universes are cages to begin with. The glory chi is thin, and the Tao laws are not obvious. If the living beings living within are not lowly, what are they? Then, are your ancestors also lowly people? Bao Jianming stared at the person who spoke, his lips curling into a mocking smirk. His words had the face of the person who spoke turning livid. He had wanted to refute, but now he had gotten himself into trouble. Back in the era of the utmost beings, the Tao marks were complete. Naturally, the ancestors could not be considered lowly. At this moment, a man who looked scholarly stood out while waving a folding fan. "Then, have you heard that the utmost beings once said that there's no high or low Tao, and there's no high or low Tao?" Bao Jianming continued questioning. For a moment, the man could not answer. This was indeed something that an utmost being had said in the past. Now that it was used here, it was just right. "Bao Jianming, are you here to attend the banquet or to cause trouble?" Jiang Zhanyan spoke up. Her gaze was slightly cold. If that's the case, then please take that lowly person from the desolate wasteland away. The woman continued. Slap. A loud slap rang out in the banquet, clearly entering the ears of every single person present. The woman was sent flying backwards. On her pretty face, a clear handprint appeared. Lin Yu stood up calmly. As though he was talking to himself, he said, "Indeed, people from the noble ancient city are all thick-skinned." He looked at his own palm, then patted it calmly. You dare to hit me?" Jiang Zhanyan could feel the raw pain on his cheek. Unable to maintain his composure, he screamed out in a shrill voice. Hiss! Everyone couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. This person from the cage of life was simply too fierce and decisive. He didn't hesitate in the slightest. Lin Yu just stood there calmly. Even Bao Jianming was somewhat surprised. But soon, he began to clap and cheer. "Do you think that with Linli's protection, you can act without fear?" Wang Chuan spoke out as well. At this moment, the woman no longer cared about her image. A long sword covered in true fire appeared in her hands, and she charged towards Lin Yu. Clang! In the blink of an eye, Lin Yu caught the sword between his fingers. And then, he flicked it. The sword bent, and Jiang Zhanyan was sent flying backwards, landing in the middle of the crowd. Lin Yu looked at Wang Chuan. He knew what these people were thinking. Haven't you all been waiting for this result? Lin Yu's lips were curled in a mocking smile. He looked at Wang Chuan. Do you dare to fight? These few words were spoken casually, but they were filled with mockery. Wang Chuan's face was a bit ugly. His goal had been seen through, and the initiative was now in someone else's hands. But at least he had achieved his goal. The origin battle platform. He said calmly, then took a step forward, heading towards the origin battlefield within the ancient city. Fellow Taoist Lin, be careful. Bao Jianming warned. Wang Chuan's power was not to be underestimated. He could already be considered one of the most powerful figures of his generation. Only that Tian Yi, whose face was unknown, was able to suppress him. Fellow Taoist Bao, don't worry. After killing him, we'll drink, Lin Yu said. His body emanated a powerful self-confidence. Although the people here were far more powerful than those of the 12 universes, as long as those old freaks didn't appear, Lin Yu would be able to deal with them with ease. The two transformed into streaks of light, arriving at the origin battlefield. This place was located within the ancient city in the east. It was extremely vast, and because the origin battlefield was so sturdy and indestructible, even experts at the Tao Inducer level would be able to do battle here. There was a supreme aura here, causing this place to be indestructible and indestructible, having existed for countless years. The crowd quickly arrived at the scene, wanting to witness this unprecedented duel. Do we have a wager for this duel? Wang Chuan's true goal was revealed. Since you've provoked me, you can use that shroud of your supreme as the wager, Wang Chuan said. The might of the shroud was obvious to all. This had the Wang family bloodline envious. Lin Yu chuckled. Using the shroud that was stained with the blood of the supreme as the wager. Back then, in order to fight against the strange beings, the supreme had killed his way into the ancestral grounds of the strange beings. But in the end, he could only return with his corpse wrapped in war leather. To think that the shroud would still be coveted by the later generations. Since you want the shroud and don't respect the supreme, what's the wager for your Wang family? What about the lives of your entire bloodline? Lin Yu questioned. This caused everyone's expressions to turn ugly. Chapter 13:10. Lin Yu's words were far too arrogant. He'd threatened to use the entire Wang clan as a wager. Do you have a death wish? Wang Chuan's eyes flashed with coldness. His words were laced with threat. How powerful do you think you are to dare to speak such words? Is the strength of the Wang clan something that you can imagine? Wang Chuan's subordinate opened his mouth once again. His tone was full of disdain. Lin Yu merely glanced at the retainer. World's End near at hand was unleashed. Before anyone could react, Lin Yu had arrived on the spectator's stand in the blink of an eye. Boom! The retainer was blasted away, his body shattered into pieces. He had a magic item on his body that protected him. Otherwise, he would have died in that one blow. Everything happened so quickly that no one could react in time. Only then did they realize that Lin Yu's strength was absolutely terrifying. This kind of remarkable ability, combined with the power of time and space, had surpassed the scope of ordinary movement techniques. It was almost beyond time and space. While they despised Lin Yu, they forgot that Lin Yu was a descendant of the first divine king of the 12 universes and had mastered the supreme laws of time and space. Time and space had been taboo since ancient times. Apart from the first divine king of the 12 universes, no one had heard of anyone who had mastered both laws at the same time. Now that the truth had appeared in front of everyone, they were all shocked. However, Lin Yu didn't intend to let the retainer go. He unleashed World's End near at hand again. In the blink of an eye, he reached the retainer who was in the process of flying backward. He had a magic weapon bestowed upon him by the Wang clan, but it had been shattered by Lin Yu's blow. Even his body had suffered serious injuries. It looked like he wouldn't survive. Everyone sighed at Lin Yu's domineering attitude. The retainer coughed up blood and finally felt the threat of death. He shouted, "Master, save me!" But it was too late. Even if Wang Chuan used his ultimate movement technique, he still couldn't catch up to Lin Yu. The sky was filled with blood mist. The retainer was dead. Hiss! Although the entourage followed Wang Chuan, his cultivation base was at the middle original god realm in the ancient city. However, in front of Lin Yu, he was still like a helpless child, unable to even struggle. The spectators all sucked in a breath of cold air. "You are very good. Your success makes me want to kill you," Wang Chuan said. Even though the life of a lackey wasn't much of a loss to the Wang clan, it wasn't much of a loss. However, Lin Yu had killed him in front of everyone. This was undoubtedly a slap to his face. Even the reputation of the entire Wang family was somewhat affected. Lin Yu looked at Wang Chuan indifferently. "Have you decided to use your Wang clan as a wager?" Lin Yu asked. "What rights do you have?" Wang Chuan retorted. "Then what right does the Wang family have to use the supreme shroud that you fought against in the past as a wager?" Lin Yu's eyes were filled with murderous intent. The utmost being of the past fought against the utmost being alone. In the end, he died on the battlefield. How pitiful was he? Without any help, he was alone. In the ancient city that he protected back then, the elderly, the weak, the women, and the children were all killed. In the end, they all stood on the city walls. And where was the Wang clan back then? Lin Yu's words silenced everyone. They had all heard that the utmost being of the past had broken through after the ancient history. He was called the Heaven Master and was invincible for an era. However, he ended up in such a pitiful state. Back then, in order to protect the ancient city, the utmost being had fallen at the origin ground. And now there are people who are coveting his burial cloth? What a joke! Lin Yu's lips curled into a cold smirk. He looked at Wang Chuan with an aggressive gaze. Even if that's the case, the burial cloth of the Heaven Master should not be in the hands of a lowly person from the cage. Wang Chuan said slowly after a long time. A battle was unavoidable now. You keep saying that you're from a lowly place. Let me see what the Wang clan of the origin ground is capable of. Lin Yu did not say anything more. He said one last sentence. Let me see if your Wang clan has the rights to possess the Heaven Master's burial cloth. The aura on Wang Chuan's body was blazing. He made his move immediately. A reddish-gold battle spear appeared in his hand as he charged towards Lin Yu. Lin Yu swung his stone sword. He did not block. Instead, he took the initiative to attack. He did not hesitate to let his shoulder be pierced. Poof! Wang Chuan retreated. He did not expect Lin Yu to attack so fiercely. He did not care that he would be severely injured. Wang Chuan retracted his body to block. However, his shoulder was swept by the sword light. Immediately, blood flowed out. Even Bao Jianming and the others did not expect Lin Yu to be so fierce. He raised his hand and met the attack head-on. It seems that your Wang clan has been holed up in the ancient city for a long time. Have you lost your courage? The blood on Lin Yu's stone sword evaporated as he spoke indifferently. Although the injury on Wang Chuan's shoulder healed in an instant, his eyes were still gloomy. It was just the first attack, but he was defeated. Moreover, this had nothing to do with strength. It was because of his own belief and courage. If he had fought Lin Yu head-on, perhaps Lin Yu's injury would have been worse. However, in order to prevent himself from being injured, he retracted his body and dodged. Some people's gazes could not help but become strange. Lin Yu's cultivation was obtained by killing all the way. He was incomparably experienced. However, Wang Chuan had always been in the ancient city. Even if his talent was terrifying, he had almost no actual combat experience. It was difficult to make an accurate judgment in the midst of a battle. You've really made me want to kill you. Wang Chuan's eyes gradually became gloomy. The spear in his hand emitted a blazing killing light. It illuminated the entire battlefield of origin. Lin Yu just looked at this scene indifferently. Wang Chuan's cultivation was indeed stronger than Lin Yu's. At the same time, Wang Chuan's 9 layers of inner world continued to press down on Lin Yu. Boom! Lin Yu did not move. The 9 layers of inner world also appeared on the battlefield of origin. Heaven and earth were torn apart at this moment. Endless torrents enveloped the entire battlefield. The collision of the 9 layers of inner world. Everyone was shocked. A place from the universe with incomplete Tao laws actually condensed 9 layers of inner world in the original God realm. To them, this was undoubtedly a shock. At this moment, the two were already in the middle of the collision. They attacked at the same time. Sword light crisscrossed. It pierced through the void. The spear was unparalleled, almost piercing through Lin Yu's inner world. Amidst the aftermath of the collision, the two continued to exchange blows, shocking everyone. They finally understood why Lin Yu dared to be so arrogant. Only now did they realize why Lin Yu could be recognized by the Heavenly Master Shroud. His talent was definitely one of the best since ancient times. However, it was clear that Wang Chuan's realm and cultivation were a level higher than Lin Yu's. Now in the battle, he vaguely had the upper hand. Wang Chuan was already at the peak of the original God realm, and seemed to be able to reach the half-step Tao realm at any time. His body exuded a wondrous aura. Don't forget, Taoist Lin has comprehended the laws of space and time. Bao Jianming did not show any panic. The laws of space and time were too supreme. Almost in the later realms, they were supreme existences. The Tao law that Wang Chuan has comprehended is a Tao seed from the land of origin. It is flawless and might not be weaker than the laws of space and time. Fu Lingyun frowned slightly. Chapter 13:11. At this moment, Wang Chuan wanted to use his own power of law to kill Lin Yu. Endless metal energy appeared in the void, turning the world into an impenetrable fortress. Countless blades, swords, axes, and axes were formed, slashing toward Lin Yu. Gung Metal Tao Law. Now, someone recognized the Tao law that Wang Chuan had mastered. His Tao law was taken from the land of origin. It carried the Tao seed of the great Tao, and he had perfectly merged with it. As long as he mastered it, it would be a flawless Tao law. The pure Gung Metal Tao law made the great Tao of heaven and earth retreat temporarily. Lin Yu held the stone sword, his face as calm as ever. Countless blades, swords, axes, and axes rushed out from the void. Some were even bigger than the primitive mountain range, and the runes on them carried an immortal aura. The surrounding people's expressions changed slightly. They wondered if they could survive Wang Chuan's gunmetal Dao law. Lin Yu is in danger. Bai Lu frowned. They were from the same era as Wang Chuan, so they knew that the Wang family valued him. They had paid a huge price to find the Dao seed of the great Dao of heaven and earth, so that he could form a flawless Dao law in the original God realm. Endless space-time particles appeared beside Lin Yu, condensing on the stone sword. What is Daoist Lin doing? Fu Lingyun didn't understand. Endless space-time particles, compressed to the extreme, surrounded Lin Yu. Something's not right. Bao Jiaming saw the clue. His strength was enough to rank in the top 5 of this generation in the ancient city. Daoist Lin has mastered more than one Dao law. Following Bao Jiaming's words, both Bai Lu and Fu Lingyun were staring at the battlefield. They were in the original God realm, so they knew that a cultivator who mastered 2 Dao laws at the same time was a terrifying existence. If one mastered too many Dao laws, it would cause a huge problem when breaking through to the original God realm. In the end, it would become a part of the great Dao of heaven and earth. This was called Dao assimilation. However, it was clear that besides the time and space Dao law, there were several other Dao laws in Lin Yu's inner world. Although they weren't considered top-notch Dao laws, the combination of a few of them was still extremely terrifying. At this moment, several types of Dao laws revolved around Lin Yu. Sacrifice. Lin Yu indifferently spat out a word. The stone sword was placed horizontally in front of him, and he suddenly swung it down. Endless particles swept across. Retreat quickly. The faces of the people on the spectators' stand changed drastically when they sensed the terrifying fluctuation. They were retreating quickly. Lin Yu's mystical ability combined several Dao laws. Its scope was too broad. Almost at the same time, everyone retreated and left the grandstand. They stared at the horrifying scene in the air. Humph! Wang Chuan snorted coldly and said, "You're biting off more than you can chew. You can't escape." At this moment, Wang Chuan clasped his palms together. 2 copper walls condensed from the Dao of metal formed from the 2 sides of heaven and earth, crushing towards Lin Yu. At the same time, the 9 layers of the inner world enveloped Lin Yu. The battle between the two had already spread to the spectators' stand. Tian-Yi was still indifferent and didn't make a move. His body rippled with the light of the banished immortals, blocking the aftershocks. He looked at Lin Yu and said, "This person is very amazing. However, it seems that his realm is still too low. It's difficult for him to defeat Wang Chuan," a bright-eyed woman beside him said at this moment. However, Tian-Yi shook his head and said, "He hasn't used his full strength yet." Tian-Yi had extremely high standard. Now, he had already seen through Lin Yu's current situation. The space between heaven and earth was occupied by the 2 copper walls. The boundless gung-metal Daoist law on it materialized, and huge cracks appeared in the void. Everyone was incomparably shocked. This was the first time Lin Yu had been obstructed since he started comprehending the divine ability, solitary. It was enough to see that the Dao of metal that Wang Chuan mastered was really powerful. This was the Dao law that existed in the Dao seed of heaven and earth. It was flawless. After reaching Wang Chuan's realm, he could already wield it like an arm. Die! Wang Chuan clasped his hands together. The 2 copper walls began to crush towards Lin Yu. Now, the power of silence was gradually dissipating. Everyone stood in the void, feeling that this battle was about to come to an end. Lin Yu was amazing enough. However, he came from an incomplete universe after all. Regardless of whether it was Dao techniques or Dao laws, they were all incomplete. Wang Chuan's cultivation and Dao laws crushed Lin Yu. How could he fight? However, the Dao of silence that Lin Yu executed made everyone feel a lingering fear. They were all guessing whether Lin Yu's Dao of silence was inherited from his first ancestor. People from lowly places shouldn't have appeared in the land of origin, someone mocked at this moment. However, Bao Jianming's gaze instantly shut him up. Everyone stared at the battlefield. The Wang family's genius is just SOSO. Lin Yu, who was already suppressed by the copper walls, said leisurely, resisting stubbornly. Are you still so stubborn? Wang Chuan's forehead was already covered in sweat. Unleashing this kind of Dao art consumed a lot of energy for him. To be able to make Wang Chuan reach such a level, that kid from the cage should be proud of himself. A man who knew Wang Chuan and had also condensed 9 levels of his inner world said at this moment. Even he thought that Lin Yu was just being stubborn. However, there was a sudden change. Just as everyone thought that the dust had settled, Bao Jianming was hesitating whether to go down and save Lin Yu. An unparalleled aura burst out from his body. Everyone felt a terrifying sense of oppression. It's the pressure from the inner world. Even the person who had spoken earlier was astonished. He had condensed 9 levels of his inner world, which already belonged to the forbidden category. Who else could make him feel the pressure from the inner world? Boom! The copper wall shattered with a loud bang. The inner world of the inner world appeared in the world. At this moment, Lin Yu was like the only god walking in a lonely land. He was like an ancient well with no ripples, carrying extreme power. Now that he had reached the late original God realm, he could temporarily become one with the Tao fruit of this world. A power that made one's heart palpitate spread out at this moment. The inner world of the inner world. The guy from the cage has condensed 10 levels of his inner world. The people in the land of origin had a much deeper understanding of realms than those in the universe. They all knew what the inner world of the inner world meant. It was a taboo among taboo. There was a rumor that the powerful paramount in the past had condensed more than 9 levels of his inner world when he was in the original God realm. Was this a path to supremacy? A doorstep? It was hard to imagine the existence that could reach the paramount. In the endless history of billions of creatures, there were only a few of them. And now, Lin Yu had shown the paramount godhead. No, impossible. Wang Chuan couldn't believe it. Even Tian Yi's eyes were shining brightly at this moment. At this moment, Lin Yu raised his left hand and clenched it in the air. All the metal laws were destroyed. They weren't under Wang Chuan's control. Everything seemed to return to dust, and no longer existed. Even Wang Chuan's figure was showing signs of being obliterated and cracking apart. Wang Chuan's life slip is shattering. In the secret land of the ancient city, Wang Tianjun woke up. His eyes were filled with shock. Puff! At this moment, Wang Chuan didn't even seem to be able to struggle. His body directly shattered. Everyone's pupils shrank. The scene in front of them was too terrifying. It was beyond their knowledge. Powerful, extremely powerful. Bao Jianming's face became colorful. He even forgot to breathe. A talisman appeared in Wang Chuan's body. It emitted a mysterious power, forcibly reviving his life. Impossible! Wang Chuan couldn't believe it. Lin Yu didn't plan to let him go. He bent his fingers again. He was like a god who could control the life and death of others. How dare you! A passage appeared in the void. Wang Tianjun appeared in front of Wang Chuan. He raised his hand and the terrifying energy fluctuations disappeared. His cultivation base at the peak of the Tao realm was revealed. Chapter 13:12. Thief, why are you so fierce? Wang Tianjun glanced at Wang Chuan's condition, and a murderous intent unconsciously appeared in her eyes. He had already felt the combat strength that Lin Yu had shown just now from far away. Now he wanted to eliminate all future troubles. A light burst out from his eyes, but it was inaudible. In the eyes of the crowd, it was just an ordinary questioning gaze. The moment it was about to touch his body, Lin Yu suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His aura immediately weakened, and his soul light dimmed in an instant. This was Wang Tianjuan's method. Strange and terrifying, it was impossible to guard against. Old man. Lin Yu's eyes were filled with coldness. He had used the power of the King of God's order to reverse time and space. He had restored his state to the peak. Wang Tianjun exclaimed softly. Is it that artifact? She stretched out her withered palm. At this time, it directly penetrated Lin Yu's body, trying to seize Lin Yu's King of God's order by force. Not only that, Lin Yu could not resist Wang Tianjuan's palm at all. She even reached Lin Yu's inner world, trying to seize the shroud. Lin Yu's cultivation erupted. Everyone was sighing. Now Wang Tianjun was here. As an existence who was about to break through to the half-step sitting height realm, who could resist her? At this time, Bao Jiaming stepped forward and said, Tianjun, isn't it inappropriate for you to do this? I don't need a kid like you to teach me how to do things. Wang Tianjuan's gaze imprisoned Bao Jiaming in place, making it difficult for him to move or speak. A Dao channeling realm expert was an invincible existence in the original God realm. It could be completely crushed, and it was impossible to resist at all. Lin Yu was trying his best to resist at this time. However, his inner world was about to be completely destroyed by the withered palm. Just at this critical moment, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. Boom! A terrifying aura spread out. Wang Tianjun had no time to react. Her face was hit hard, and her body flew out. The crutch in his hand fell to the ground. A figure in loose robes appeared in the sky. His aura was even more blazing than the primordial sun of the origin grounds. He was like an eternal furnace that burned with a biting cold aura. The newcomer was Linli. The power he displayed made everyone tremble in fear. Now, he was actually unable to withstand the pressure and had to kneel down. Shameless little thing. Linli looked calmly at Wang Tianjun, who had yet to fully stabilize himself, and said disdainfully from the corner of his eye. His seniority was so high that it was frightening. He had once followed beside the utmost being. There was no problem with him calling Wang Tianjun little guy now. Linli, you've gone too far. Wang Tianjun steadied himself, his wooden staff returning to his hands. She looked straight at Linli. Linli's palm strike just now had been extremely terrifying, and had been infused with his cultivation base. The fingerprints on Wang Tianjuan's face were clearly visible, and wouldn't be healed in a short time. Trying to take advantage of your seniority. Not giving him any chance to explain, Linli gave him yet another slap. His moves were very profound. Lin Yu knew that Linli had actually grasped the laws of space as well. When someone at his level attacked, ordinary people wouldn't be able to resist at all. Even Wang Tianjun, who was about to break through to the quasi-utmost being level, was at the same level as Linli on the surface. Even though he was on guard now, he still suffered a solid slap. Blood splattered everywhere, and Wang Tianjuan's face was already bruised. No one dared to speak now. They were all silent on the side. Linli's seniority in the ancient city was frighteningly high. If those old monsters hadn't come out, no one would have dared to speak. However, Linli was even more domineering than Lin Yu. You've gone too far, Linli. Wang Tianjuan's face was cold. But he knew that he wasn't Linli's match now. Even if Linli's body was already in a huge problem. Too far. Linli sneered. You want to steal the God King's token of the current God King of the 12 universes and kill the God King in the cradle? Every single one of them is enough for me to kill you 100 times over. Linli's words were like pearls, carrying an incomparably domineering air. That kid wants to kill the Qilin son of my Wang clan. How should we deal with that? Although Wang Tianjuan's seniority was lower than Linli's, his level was still higher. In addition, his Wang clan had a slumbering old ancestor whose level of cultivation was unfathomable. He had enough confidence to speak to Linli. If someone of the same generation wants to kill Lin Yu, I don't care. But if some shameless bastard wants to intervene, then don't blame me for being merciless. Linley didn't care about the so-called Wang clan at all, speaking directly. Since this is a life-and-death duel on the battlefield of origins, life and death are up to fate. To intervene now is shameless. Linley's words caused Wang Tianjuan's face to turn ashen. However, Wang Chuan's defeat was obvious to all. Everyone could bear witness to it. Just now, Wang Chuan had used his killer move in an attempt to kill Lin Yu. "Do you want to fight amongst yourselves?" Wang Tianjun said directly. "What a big accusation!" Linley snorted coldly, then said, "I don't mind wiping out a mere Wang clan." Linley wasn't afraid at all. He had hidden his trump card. If the Wang clan was aggressive, he didn't mind wiping out the entire Wang clan from the ancient city. Everyone watching the battle had solemn looks on their faces. They had thought that this would be an ordinary battle, but who would have thought that it would turn out like this? The Wang clan was extremely powerful in the ancient city. There were even a few old ancestors who were still in hibernation. So long as they appeared, the ancient city would tremble. And now, Linley's tone was incomparably domineering. He wasn't afraid of Wang Tianjuan's threat at all, and he said that he didn't mind wiping out the entire Wang clan. The atmosphere was very oppressive. In the past, the people of the 12 universes who went to the origin lands to fight were full of gut. They once caused the entire strange race to tremble. Now, you're just a clan from an ancient city. What right do you have to spout nonsense here? Linley stared straight into the secret area. Chaos lightning shot out of his mouth. It caused the entire secret area to tremble. No one knew how many experts were hiding in the secret area. But Linley wasn't afraid at all. Sigh. A faint sigh rang out from the secret area. Wang Tianjun, let's drop this matter. The Wang clan has lost a battle between the younger generation. That means it has lost. The voice was ancient and ancient, carrying a hint of decay. Clearly, this was one of the legendary old ancestors of the Wang clan in the secret area. He had spoken. He didn't target Linley. Instead, he asked Wang Tianjun to keep the peace. This caused many people to be astonished. Under their influence, the Wang family had always been domineering since the ancient times. Never before had they chosen to submit like today. Fine. Wang Tianjun was practically gnashing her teeth. She took Wang Chuan with her and left. Everyone was watching Linley and Lin Yu on the battlefield. At the same time, some people had already realized that Linley's true level of cultivation was most likely not as simple as being at the peak of the Dao realm. Otherwise, the old ancestor of the Wang clan wouldn't have acted like this. "Thank you, senior." Lin Yu clasped his hands. At that time, he had already been prepared to use all of his trump card. He wanted to forcibly borrow the Dao fruits of his past life and future life to resist. But Linley seemed to have noticed this long ago. As soon as Wang Tianjun attacked, Linley had arrived. Linley shook his head. This banquet ended on a sour note. After everyone had left, Yi Zichen stood up. Everyone was talking about Lin Yu. After all, to them, the inner world of the 10th floor was simply too shocking. They had only seen bits and pieces of it in the ancient books. Now, the real thing had appeared in front of them. But what they didn't know was that when Lin Yu and Wang Chuan had battled, he hadn't used his full power. The other two layers of Lin Yu's inner worlds hadn't manifested yet. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.